Chapter 1359. After the new emperor of Liang ascended the throne, he attached great importance to the administration of culture, especially the Hanlin Academy. His love for the Hanlin Academy was so great that it could not be increased any further. First of all, he moved Xiao Jiaoying's yamen to the right side of the center line between the Wuing Hall and the Baohe Hall. Then he issued an edict that the Hanlin Academy's head scholar and the Ministry of Rites would jointly preside over the imperial examinations, which became a practice of the current dynasty. Therefore, the saying, "In the future, those who are not from the Hanlin Academy are not allowed to enter the pavilion," spread everywhere in the capital. Today, the Hanlin Academy, which was holding a grand housewarming ceremony, could be said to be a gathering of heroes. What a dazzling lineup of splendid scenes! Jean Lanting, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, who made his name here, Li Jifu, the new Zhuang Yuan of the first year of Xiangfu, who held a post in the Hanlin Academy, Wu Tsongxian, who was both Tanhua and a new talent in the chess world, Song Kelly, the young phoenix of the Song family, who moved to the Hanlin Academy because of meritorious service, Yan Qiji, the son of the grand scholar of the Dongyuan Pavilion, Chen Wang, the assistant minister of the left scattered cavalry of Liang, Sun Yin, who was once the right chancellor of the Imperial College. Before this group of young talents, the oldest of whom was no more than 30 years old, gathered together, many important officials and officials who had a relationship with the Hanlin Academy had already left one after another. For example, Xiao Yuling, the second in command of the Imperial Secretariat, Tantanan, Huan Wen, who was recognized as a veteran of the Hanlin Academy, the heavenly official Yin Mao Chen, who had been in charge of the Hanlin Academy for more than 10 years and had recently entered the Ministry of Appointments, and the Minister of War, Liu Baijie, the sword immortal of Tangxi, who had the title of Xia Guan, had come either alone or together. They really made the brand new Hanlin Academy shine, staining it with an air of nobility and elegance. At this time, in the secluded courtyard at the beginning of spring, under a small tree with branches as small as jujube flowers, everyone was enjoying a game of Go. The people playing Go were not national players, nor were they the famous Wu Tsongxian who had defeated 3 national players in a row in the capital. Instead, they were 2 people whom everyone in the court felt were unfamiliar with. There was a huge age gap between the two. There was a stone table and 4 stone stools. On the table was a yellow rosewood chessboard that was very old-fashioned. On the left and right sides of the chessboard were black and white Go boxes that contained white and black Go pieces. On the stone stools were embroidered cushions. The 2 people playing Go were of course sitting and chatting. However, the people sitting on the other 2 stools were the pinnacle of honor in the world, the current emperor, Xiao Zhuan, and the empress, Yen Dongwu. Other than the handsome young man nicknamed Little Bookcase by the emperor, there was also a commoner from Liang who was still a commoner. He was Fan Changho from Xiangzhou, Guangling Road. Together with Wu Tsongxian, they were known as the First and Third Nine. In the past, Fan Changho was more skilled than Wu Tsongxian, so he was also known as Fan Shiduan. At the same time, Fan Changho was good at painting dried rocks, wild plum blossoms, and winter bamboo. Among them, wild plum blossoms were the best, and they were proud and unsullied. Now in Tai and City, there was a saying that Fan Changho was a tree alone in spring. His paintings could be said to be priceless in the capital's officialdom. Before Wu Tsongxian became famous, the hidden Fan Changho was specially summoned to the capital by the emperor. The reason for this imperial edict was that his real identity was Little Bookcase from the imperial astronomer. Under the emperor's instructions, he and Wu Tsongxian played 6 games in a row, 3 slow and 3 fast. Wu Tsongxian lost all of them cleanly, so Fan Changho, who was known as the #1 player in the chess world, naturally entered the emperor's sight. The prize for this game that the emperor personally set was not small. If Fan Changho won, then he could directly stay in the Hanlin Academy as the Yellow Gatekeeper. Now the Hanlin Academy was the well-deserved Dragon Pavilion for all the scholars in the world. The spectators were the smartest few people in the Liang dynasty. In fact, they were well aware that whether Fan Chongho won or lost on the chessboard was not important. To simplify the emperor's heart, Fan Duan had already won outside of the chessboard. Little Bookcase was probably endowed with extraordinary talent, but in the end he was still a child. He did not have a good sitting posture. His body was slanted, one hand supporting his chin, the other hand moving quickly. It was almost as if he was hitting the board when Fan Chongho placed a piece. On the other hand, the plainly dressed Fan Chongho was at a disadvantage in terms of the demeanor of an otherworldly master. But this disadvantage was only in terms of the eccentricity of the imperial astronomer. In reality, Fan Chongho was sitting calmly and attentively. Whether it was slowly picking up a piece from the chessboard or not moving, when he was thinking long and hard, they both had the demeanor of a grandmaster. Fan Duan's response to Little Bookcase's aggressive attacks, both inside and outside of the chessboard, was neither too fast nor too slow. For the time being, there was no sign of victory or defeat between the two of them. Including Emperor Zhao Zhuan, the people who were able to stand aside and watch the game, not to mention Wu Zongxian, who was very good at chess, even Chen Wang, who had never played chess with anyone before, had good eyesight. Even Empress Yan Dongwu, who was known as the female scholar of Beiliang in the past, could not take her eyes off the game and was very focused. Yan Qiji was standing right behind his elder sister, who was known as the mother of the empire. He was the only one who gave up halfway when he went to the border to observe the political affairs. He parted ways with the Ministry of War, who was sent from Ji Bei to Liaoxi, and returned to the capital alone. This incident had damaged Yan Qiji's reputation in the scholarly circle. However, with the great protective talisman of the imperial uncle, no one dared to jump out and criticize him. Yan Qiji looked at the intrigue on the chessboard. He quietly raised his head and looked at the old Chinese parasol tree whose branches were filled with the joy of spring. His face was filled with fatigue. If the trip to Liangzhou had disappointed him in Kong Wuqi, then the trip to Ji Bei had angered Yan Qiji. The defense line in Ji Bei had been an important military base for the Central Plains to defend against Beimang since the Han family. Although Liang paid more attention to the two Liao provinces, the generals who held the military power in Ji Bei were all carefully selected by the Ministry of War and candidates who were placed high hopes on by the imperial court. But what did Yan Qiji see in Ji Bei's northern pass? It was retreating before the battle and shrinking the defense line. Faced with his reprimand, the few border defense generals were vague. Gao Tingshu, who was picky in Beiliang, was surprisingly silent. Obviously, he had received instructions from someone in the capital. Yan Qiji retracted his gaze and looked coldly at Jin Sanlang, who was not far away from him. The latter also sensed the unfriendly gaze from the young imperial uncle, but he responded with an impeccably gentle smile. Yan Qiji met his gaze. Suddenly, Yan Qiji felt his sleeve being pulled. He lowered his head and saw his sister pointing at a spot on the chessboard. She smiled gently and said, "Eunuch Jing seems to have made a wonderful move. Don't you think so?" When the child heard the empress praise, he raised his head and smiled brightly. Yan Qiji sighed softly. He stopped arguing with the assistant minister and turned to watch the game. Fan Zhangho's response was still lukewarm. This made Chen Wang, who was also a relative of the imperial family like Yan Qiji, see him in a new light. Ordinary poor scholars would spread their tails like peacocks if they wanted to see the face of the emperor. It was not easy for Fan Zhangho to be so relaxed. The Zhuangyuan, Li Jifu, was the son of a wealthy family in Liaodong. In terms of poetry, he was not as good as the second place, Gao Tingshu. In terms of the four arts, he was far from being as good as Wu Zongxian. Thus, most people in the court thought that he was not worthy of the title of Zhuangyuan. In reality, in the poetry club founded by Jean Lanting, it was rare to hear Li Jifu speak so loudly. However, a few days ago, the Minister of Revenue, Bai Gua, had asked to borrow Li Jifu from the Hanlin Academy. This made people realize that perhaps Li Jifu was not as unlikable as he appeared on the surface. Today, the only person in the group who could compete with Jean Lanting, Chen Xiaobao, only spoke a few words with Li Jifu. Wu Zongxian had originally wanted to go up and get familiar with the left Sanchi's assistant minister, but soon there was an awkward silence. Compared to everyone present, Song Kelly's appearance today was the most unexpected. The two masters of the Song family who had dominated the literary world for decades were not worthy of the words, extremely tragic. After their deaths, their posthumous titles were only below average. At the time, Song Kelly had been demoted from the noble Hanlin Academy to a county magistrate. Jean Lanting, who was more familiar with the rules of the officialdom, was very curious. How could the young phoenix of the Song family, who had fallen from a high branch into the mud, return to the capital? Who had he latched onto? For the time being, the nobles of the imperial clan did not have this ability. Tantanon had always had a bad impression of the Song family, so all the old people of Zhonglu did not have a good impression of Song Kelly. He had also not heard of the head of the secretariat, Qi Yonglong, having any interaction with the Song family. Jean Lanting pondered for a moment but could not understand the main point, so he was too lazy to bother. Song Kelly's ups and downs were destined to not affect the overall situation. In the past, Jean Lanting did want to take the initiative to show goodwill to the eldest grandson of the Song family, who was also a member of the Hanlin Academy. He even wanted to personally send him a few hundred knives to make his own signboard, but now, even the assistant minister could turn a blind eye to this person. In a small court meeting filled with officials, he, Jean Lanting, could only respectfully accompany the last seat, but at this time and place, he was worthy of being called the head of the Phoenix. As the Hanlin Academy rose in status in the Liang Imperial Court, the position of the Ministry of Rites would also rise. It was certain that he would be in charge of the Ministry of Rites in the future. When the time came, the Ministry of Rites would be in charge and the Hanlin Academy would be in charge. Then, he, Jean Lanting, would be the common teacher of all the scholars during the auspicious era. Jean Lanting smiled and bowed his head, looking down at the chessboard. He placed one hand on the suet jade belt on his waist that the emperor had personally bestowed upon him, and the other hand quietly clenched. The literary vein of the world was in his hands. Why should he worry about the connections in the imperial court? Chapter 1360. Wu Zongxian was probably the one who cared the most about the outcome of the game. With a complicated expression, he looked at Fan Zhongho, who had played against him many times, and felt bitter. Fan Zhongho, a remnant of the spring and autumn period, also known as the son of Buddha, was a thorn in Wu Zongxian's heart that he could not remove. No matter how much they talked in public or in private, Wu Zongxian knew that he both despised and envied this person. He despised Fan Zhongho for ignoring the imperial examinations, and envied Fan Zhongho for having heavenly beings by his side to scheme for him. Before and after he had defeated 3 national chess players in a row, Wu Zongxian had not once mentioned Fan Zhongho. However, the well-informed capital quickly learned that there was a Fan Shudwan in Xiangzhou. Before the emperor summoned Fan Zhongho to the capital, he had a relaxed monarch and minister question-and-answer session with him. Wu Zongxian could only bite the bullet and say something insincere, Fan Yuetian and I are evenly matched. Unfortunately, he still could not stop the emperor's curiosity, especially after he had suffered consecutive crushing defeats to the child who was practically the reincarnation of a chess immortal. According to Jean Sabin, the emperor had urged the Ministry of Rites almost every day to ask when Fan Shudwan would enter the capital. To be able to receive such special treatment, the previous one was the prime minister who had said, "If I don't come out, what will the common people do?" When Fan Zhongho returned to the capital alone, Wu Zongxian went to the courier station that night and earnestly told Fan Zhongho about that child prodigy style of chess. The first move looked sloppy, unintentional and powerless, but in the middle of the game, it suddenly changed. It was as if a towering building had suddenly risen from the rubble and ruins, with the momentum of a lion hunting down a rabbit from above. Of course, Wu Zongxian knew that this kind of illusory saying was equivalent to not saying anything. After Fan Zhongho heard it, it was useless. As for why he only said the middle game and not the end game, it was not that Wu Zongxian wanted to hide it, but that Wu Zongxian had never played more than 200 games with the child. Wu Zongxian, who valued face and reputation the most, was too embarrassed to say anything. Wu Zongxian had, with great difficulty, made a name for himself in the capital, so how could he be willing to let Fan Zhongho steal his limelight in Grand Peace City? He wanted nothing more than for Fan Zhongho to suffer a crushing defeat. Simply put, Wu Zongxian, one of the top 9 chess players in the world, could lose to the genius youth rumored to have come from the imperial astronomer. It was like the world's top martial artist losing to an immortal on Earth, without any damage to his reputation. But he absolutely could not lose to Fan Zhongho by too much. This was just like how Li Chungang had lost to Wang Xianji, and then Wang Xianji had lost to Su Fingnian. Fan Zhongho's slow play was only compared to the lightning-fast speed of the imperial astronomer's little bookcase. 2 hours later, after Fan Zhongho had made more than a dozen consecutive moves, he had made his first decisive move. The child with a carefree expression seemed to have seen his opponent for the first time. He no longer rested his chin on his hand or looked left and right. He sat up straight, but he did not look at the game. Instead, he stared straight at Fan Zhongho, who was rolling up his sleeves with his head lowered. Everyone present, including Wu Zongxian, could not see the essence of this move, let alone the other spectators. Among them, Jean Lanting could not help but turn his head to ask Wu Zongxian in a low voice. The latter did not dare to speak carelessly. Sun Yin stretched out 2 fingers to rub his earlobes and yawned. Song Kelly narrowed his eyes and pursed his lips tightly. Chen Wang was carefully observing the changes in the expression of the imperial astronomer. Li Jifu carefully looked at the emperor, who was leaning forward with a frown. Yan Qiji, whose mind was on the chessboard, bent down and whispered to his sister, Yan Dongwu. If the calm and composed Fan Zhongho was included, not counting the Emperor Zhao Zhuan, the Empress Yan Dongwu, and that imperial astronomer Jian Jing, then today under the green Polonia tree of the Hanlin Academy, there were as many as 4 people from the northern Liangdao, Chen Wang, Sun Yin, Yan Qiji, and Jean Lanting. Gongnamdu had Wu Zongxian, Guangling had Fan Zhongho, Liangliao had Li Jifu, and the capital had Song Kelly. From this, it seemed that the current emperor was more magnanimous than the previous emperor towards Beiliang. The emperor looked at the little bookcase with interest. For the first time, he showed a fierce expression towards a certain person. He tried to smooth things over. Let's close the game for now. You two can play later. Little bookcase, Fan Zhongho, try your best to make this game a famous one. If the ending is even better, I will ask the masters in the palace to paint for you. I have to go attend a small court meeting. If I am late, I will be nagged by Tantanon for half a day. Jean Lanting, dressed in purple robes, quickly bowed slightly and made a path for the emperor and the empress. The emperor held the empress's hand and left with a smile. Yan Qiji saw them off alone. As the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting also had to attend the small court meeting. However, the emperor did not say anything, so he could not stick to the emperor's side. After all, he could be suspected of using the emperor's power to intimidate others. After the 3 families left, he purposely pulled Wu Zongxian out of the Hanlin Academy. The latter had been observing politics at the Ministry of Rights. Compared to the quiet Li Jifu, who had a higher ranking in the court examination, Jean Lanting favored Wu Zongxian, who was also a pillar of the poetry club. He also had a higher opinion of Gao Tingshu, who had already made a name for himself in the Ministry of War. Yan Dongwu asked softly, "Why do you think so highly of Fan Zhongho?" The emperor turned his head and winked at the empress. He said softly, "Winning in chess is just a small matter. What benefit does it bring to the country? However, King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, has a blind chess player, Lu Su. As the emperor of a country, how can I not have a Fan Zhongho by my side? Yan Dongwu could not help but laugh. You can be angry over this. Your Majesty, are you still a child? The emperor said with a face full of resentment, am I old in your heart? Yan Dongwu suddenly remembered that his younger brother, Yan Qiji, was still following behind him. He coughed lightly. The emperor laughed out loud and did not take it to heart. He purposely slowed down his pace, allowing his brother-in-law, who had been snubbed in Ji-Bei, to catch up with him. Then, he comforted him softly, I won't advise you to do anything regarding Ji-Bei, I just want you to not be anxious. I heard your sister say that she does not want to stay in the Ministry of War anymore. Where do you want to go? The Ministry of Rights or the Ministry of Appointments? Yan Dongwu was about to speak when the emperor tightened his grip on her hand. She could only swallow her words. Yan Qiji was obviously afraid of his sister who was becoming more and more imposing. He hesitated for a moment before saying softly, Your Majesty, I want to come to the Hanlin Academy. There are many books here. Chapter 1361. The emperor glared at him and said, When there are no outsiders, call me brother-in-law. However, it's not a problem for you to come to Hanlin Academy, but you have to start as a servant first. Otherwise, I don't mind letting you be a big servant. Your temper is too gentle and you don't want to fight for anything. You will definitely be ostracized by many elders. Those old scholars are not the same as the officials of the 6 ministries. They don't care if you are the emperor's uncle. Yan Qiji nodded. The emperor turned to Yan Dongwu and smiled gently, You two should talk more. As an outsider, I won't be an eyesore. When the emperor walked away with Song Tonglu, the number 1 eunuch of the dynasty, Yan Dongwu asked in a low voice, Why didn't you return the thing I gave you to that person? Yan Qiji's face was slightly pale. He said guiltily, I didn't see Brother Feng. She said sternly, Shut up. Yan Qiji's body trembled and he asked carefully, Or should I secretly destroy it? Yan Dongwu almost instantly became angry. Then, she tried to suppress her anger. Her face was uncertain. Finally, she gritted her teeth and said, Hide it well. Yan Qiji was dejected. After Yan Dongwu calmed down, her tone softened and she praised, You didn't say you were going to the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Personnel. Very good. Yan Dongwu stood face to face with her brother. She helped him fix his collar and said softly, You have to remember one thing. Wen Jingwen is loyal and respectful. These 3 beautiful titles must come from Hanlin Academy. Yan Qiji said timidly, Sister, I didn't think so much. Really? Yan Dongwu bent 2 fingers and knocked on her brother's forehead. She smiled, A fool has a fool's fortune. Yan Qiji wanted to say something but stopped. Yan Dongwu obviously guessed what he was thinking. She shook her head and said, Don't worry about the things in the palace. Let's go back. I have a feeling that the young people in that courtyard will. Speaking of this, the Empress stopped talking. She looked up at the sun. It was dazzling, so it was a bit dazzling. Yan Qiji returned to the courtyard. Under the tree, the child was asking with a cold face, Who did you learn chess from? Fan Zhongho smiled and said, Since I was 4 years old, I learned chess from the ancients. The child pointed at the last move on the chessboard. The ancients couldn't make this move. Fan Zhongho calmly said, Our generation is inferior to the ancients, how can we face the future generations? It's true that you learn chess from the ancients, but when it's your turn to play chess, you can't sit and wait for eternity. The child snorted and glanced at the chessboard. If it weren't for the accident in the Imperial Astronomer and my absent-mindedness, I wouldn't have given you any chance to win the game today. Come to the star-picking pavilion of the Imperial Astronomer tomorrow. Fan Zhongho declined to comment. The child, who acted like an old man, ran away in big strides. Only at this moment did he have the childishness of his age. Ever since he was a child, he had been running around the little bookcase of the imperial astronomer. It was not easy for him to find the empress whom he was closest to. Contrary to the imposing manner of this child when he played chess with others, when he saw Yan Dongwu, he had a childish smile on his face, like a child who had met his sister who loved him dearly. Yan Dongwu rubbed the little bookcase's head and said sympathetically, "It's been hard on you. The imperial astronomer has suffered such a huge accident, and His Majesty still wants you to play chess with others. I'll help you scold him later." In the accident in the tight blockade not long ago, there were more than 800 guards who had died in the battle. Most of them were elite imperial soldiers who were highly skilled in martial arts, and there were also dozens of masters who had koi fish pouches. Especially the latter, when they were escorting something to Guangling Road, more than 100 of the top Jianghu people who had been recruited by the Ministry of Justice of the imperial court had all died mysteriously. Zhao Go had already been seriously injured, and this loss was no different from adding fuel to the fire. But compared to the real loss, the death of the Qi cultivators in the imperial astronomer was nothing at all. Among these so-called immortals, there was no lack of experts with the mysterious finger divine ability, and they were indispensable to the imperial court of Liang. Their existence in itself was a kind of magnificent deterrence that could symbolize the majesty of the heavenly Tao. The emperor was the person who was destined by heaven, so he was under heaven's command. In the end, the Qi cultivators of the Liang North faction who supported the dragon were all killed in that bloody battle. Why did the current emperor, who had always regarded chess as an idle hobby, move the Hanlin Academy in a hurry? Why did he personally create momentum for Fan Sherdwan and Fan Chongho? Or was it because he wanted to divert the attention of the officials and try his best to suppress the turbulent ripples that affected the entire capital? Yan Dongwu even saw with her own eyes that the cultured and elegant fourth prince locked himself in the imperial study for an entire night. When he came out, even the head eunuch Song Tonglu did not dare to approach him. It was she who had to personally go forward and bandage his bloody left hand. The little bookcase shook his head and said, "Grandpa Jianjing said that everyone has to die. I'm not sad. If I didn't have to play 3 rounds of chess with someone for Grandpa Jianjing, it wouldn't matter even if I died there." Then the child silently said in his heart, "Although the old man is dead, his disciple might have already appeared." He would not tell anyone about this matter, not even his sister Empress. Yan Dongwu laughed angrily and said, "Don't say such unlucky things. How old are you? Live well." The little bookcase laughed and said, "I want to eat osmanthus cake." Yan Dongwu held his little hand and walked in the palace. "That will have to wait until autumn. So, all the more you have to live well." In the Hanlin Academy, when Yan Qiji approached, he found that the atmosphere was a little strange. Chen Wang, who had the highest rank, and Li Jifu stood at the side and chatted. The arrogant scholar Sun Yin, who had once fought with the scholars in the Imperial College, was lying on the stone table. Fan Chongho was reviewing the game in detail. Yan Qiji had already stopped in his tracks. Suddenly, he saw Song Kelly, who was alone, smiling at him. Yan Qiji smiled knowingly and walked forward. In the spring of the 2nd year of Xiangfu, there were 6 people in this small courtyard on this day. Chen Wang, Sun Yin, Song Kelly, Fan Chongho, Li Jifu, Yan Qiji. Originally, I had already written more than 2,000 words about the Battle of the Gourd in Yuzhou. However, if I want to combine it into a chapter, I need to write at least 4,000 words. Otherwise, only 9,000 words will be too intermittent. Today, I'll just write 6,000 words. This kind of a transitional chapter is probably as unlikable as Li Jifu in the book. However, I hope that everyone can hold their noses and read it. Of course, when I wrote it myself, I was very sentimental. Yes, sentimental. I rarely boast, but when I write this kind of scene that can freeze history, it really is very sentimental. P.S. Don't worry, the next battle will be one after another. Beiliang and Guangling can be considered as fighting a country by one land. Chapter 1362. In a relay station 3 miles away from Chongqing City in Yuzhou, a young man wearing a thick fur coat stood on the side of the road. Beside him was a child who was reading a yellowed book with saliva. Beiliang Road's relay station had many willows planted on both sides, but this relay station was a little different. There were only parasol trees that could tell the difference between spring and autumn. It was said that there was a lot to pay attention to. Back then, when General Su Shao was conferred the title of king, the rich people of Chongqing City, in order to please this butcher, who was known to kill without blinking an eye, specially changed to nearly 1,000 green sycamore trees. It was all because His Royal Highness had the word Feng in his name. Feng does not rest on sycamore trees. Unfortunately, the army took a detour and continued to head west. Su Shao did not enter the city at all. This made those rich people feel very embarrassed. However, after His Royal Highness was conferred the title of King of Beiliang, the new King Liang's trusted aide, Wang Fujin, was promoted to General of Yuzhou and became the master of Chongqing City. Therefore, those old people were very happy. Every now and then, they would boast to their juniors about their foresight. Last year, when Huaihua General Zhong Hongwu was in charge of Lingzhou, the officialdom was turned upside down, but Yuzhou was peaceful. These old men were very proud. Huang Fujin also took care of these old people's families. Currently, there was an interesting saying in Chongqing City, "It's never too late to flatter someone." Dust rose from the relay station in the distance. The sound of horse hooves was getting closer and closer. The young man put away his thoughts. The leading rider was wearing a rare purple robe in Beiliang. It should be known that the purple robe in the capital was inferior to the red robe in the capital. It meant that the power of the purple robe in the capital was not as good as the local officials in the red robe. When the governor dismounted and was about to kneel, the young man smiled and waved his hand. "We are in a hurry, so there's no need for that. Let's talk in the carriage." The person who came was General Wang Fujin of Yuzhou. Of course, only the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, could make him kneel. The two sat in the carriage. Su Fengnian's eldest disciple, Fang Long, carefully put away the book and became the coachman. The sword master Mi Fingjie, who carried a long box on his back, and the death warrior Fan Shaochai, who wore a cold blade at her waist, guarded the left and right of the carriage. Su Fengnian and Huang Fujin sat opposite each other. One was casually sitting cross-legged, while the other was kneeling. Huang Fujin apologized and said, "I've kept you waiting." Su Fengnian didn't say anything. Huang Fujin also knew that this kind of official entertainment would only make the man in front of him feel disgusted. He immediately said, "According to the latest intelligence reports, the spider web pole catchers, butterfly catchers, and Beimang Jianghu experts who infiltrated Yuzhou have all been killed. Apart from the 6 missing, 2 of them were instigated. One of them was used to fish out the 6 fish that slipped through the net, while the other was used as a hidden chess piece to return to Beimang." Su Fengnian nodded. He wouldn't meddle in specific affairs and wouldn't criticize the whisk room that Chu Lushan had painstakingly built. Thus, he changed the topic and asked, "How's Su Yanbing?" Huang Fujin replied, "He's still on the way." Apart from Tai Chi and Ko Ku who died on the spot, the other 8 fled northward. 6 days ago, Pabing Peak's chief Wei Yilo was the first to be abandoned by the other experts. He killed Yufengqi for Su Yanbing. 4 days ago, Beimang's devil Ahima died 30 miles north of Yozhou's border, but he successfully stalled Su Yanbing. Fortunately, 3 days ago, the Qi cultivators of the Guanyin sect found some clues and discovered that the 6 had turned back to Shirlu County in the northwest of Yuzhou. They almost escaped. 2 days ago, another 2 Beimang experts were killed by Su Yanbing's spear. Su Fingnian chuckled softly and said, "Then there's only the small idea of the princess's grave left. The great Yufu, that old lover of spider webs Li Mibi, and Taimu Dai, who had the highest chance of becoming a sword immortal after his sword aura neared Huang Qing's level. 10 top experts were dispatched together. Moreover, they had used all their schemes, but in the end, they ended up in such a miserable state. I'm afraid that the old woman and Li Mibi didn't expect it. Oh right, rumor has it that Taimu Dai, is very young. Beimang's underworld has always said that he's the Dong Tai of the grasslands. Moreover, his realm skyrocketed during his escape. Not only did he rapidly advance to Finger Xian, but his last sword move also had some demeanor of a sword immortal. Is this true? Huang Fuji nodded and said, Taimu Dai, is different from the other Beimang experts who have stagnated in their realms. His martial arts cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. Almost every time he went through a life and death battle, he would gain something. According to the spy report, this person is at most 28 or 29 years old. He has a medium build, but moss grows under his armpits like dragon scales. It's rumored that he has the aura of a real dragon. At this point, Huang Fujin sneered and said, Taimu Dai's ancestor was indeed a mighty lord of the grasslands. The last bit of vitality of the great Feng dynasty was tormented by his ancestor. As for the dragon scales under his armpits, I think it's nonsense. Su Fingnian shook his head and said, it's not that simple. Since Huang Qing's fate didn't bestow a piece of the willow after his death, it must have landed on Taimu Dai. Perhaps the Bronze Man Grandmaster's portion was also given to him. Although Huang Fujin was from the underworld, he hated the underworld the most. It could even be said that he hated it to the bone. Su Fingnian suddenly laughed and said, in the end, he still died. Who asked him to meet a half-step martial saint? I can see that Uncle Su's realm is also rising steadily. His small half-step is more terrifying than others who break through several realms. Su Fingnian narrowed his eyes and leaned against the wall of the carriage. He said slowly, the old underworld will soon be extinct under the iron hooves of war horses. I wonder what the underworld will be like in the future. Before this, be it the fish dragon gang in Beiliang or the great snow plateau in Mount Hui, they'll all be short-lived. Dao de Sect, Chess and Sword Music School, Mount Bubang, Princess's Grave. Mount Wudong, Su Yanbing, Suaxia Valley, Mi Fingjie, Wu family's 100 cavalry and 100 swords. In addition, there were the Guanyin sect in the South Sea and Mount Lantua in the west who could no longer leave. How many more masters would die in Beiliang? Huang Fujin said resentfully, Northern Mang has just casually mobilized 20,000 cavalrymen, and all 80 strongholds outside the Great Wall of Northern Ji County have moved inwards. What a bunch of fearless good-for-nothings. If they are so capable, why don't they just give up Hengshui and Silver Harrier cities as well? Su Fingnian said calmly, the general of Silver Harrier City, Lu Yanlang, is a famous fence-sitter. When the wind blows in the capital, he can move faster than the officials in the capital. With Yuan Tingshan in North Ji County, it's certain that they'll deliberately let Beiliang win. Let's not have any hope. With a gloomy face, Huang Fujin said, if Lu Yanlang really gives up Silver Harrier, then Horizontal Water City will be left alone outside the border. Besides, the general who controls Horizontal Water City, Wei Jingtang, is one of the few favorite students of Grand Secretary Zhang Julu who rose up in the military. For many years, this man has always had a strong hostility toward Beiliang. Now that Zhang Julu is dead, Wei Jingtang can barely protect himself, let alone go against the Ministry of War. Perhaps, he will withdraw even more decisively than Lu Yanlang. With that, North Ji County's gate is wide open. Once Beimang continues to send in more soldiers, and with Gu Jiantong's Western Frontier Army remaining still, there's a possibility that North Ji County will be attacked from both front and rear. Yulwandao's Yuzhou cavalry will be in a bad situation. Previously, when they roamed outside the Great Wall of North Ji County and cut off Beimang's army supply, they will become empty talk. Su Fengnian sneered and said, "Don't worry. If Lu Yanlang and Wei Jingtang don't want to guard the gate, we'll let Yu Wandao's 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry help them." High up in the sky, a handsome bird suddenly broke through the clouds and dived down. Yu Dilong, who was acting as the coachman, raised his arm with a bright smile on his face. The bird landed on the child's arm with its claws like hooks and a powerful force. Fortunately, Yu Dilong's chi was strong and vigorous. This gerfalcon, a 6 years phoenix, came from Liaodong. It was brewed by Chu Lushan himself and gifted to His Royal Highness. The tributes from Liao were divided into 9 grades. Among the gerfalcons, which were said by the hunters of Liao, 9 years death and 1 life is rare, the 3 years dragon and the autumn yellow were the 2 rare breeds, and the 6 years phoenix was even harder to find. Su Fengnian was traveling Jianghu for the first time. Other than Old Yellow and the inferior horse, he was accompanied by this 6 years phoenix. Yu Dilong cheerfully called out, "Master." Su Fengnian poked his head out of the curtain and took the spear falcon. He intimately patted its head before untying the string on its leg. Then, he lightly shook his arm. The 6 years phoenix spread its wings and flew high up. It circled above its master's head a few times before suddenly rising up and flying away. The information that came back was only 3 simple words: guard to the death. The meaning was very clear. Wei Jingtang would guard Horizontal Water City to the death. Su Fengnian sighed softly and said, "The wind knows the strength of the grass." In his joy, Huang Fushi asked doubtfully, why would Wei Jingtang risk his life to guard Horizontal Water City? Could it be Protector General Chu's secret plan? Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "No matter how skilled Fu Shuifang is, he can't bribe a scholar like Wei Jingtang." Su Fengnian thought for a while and said, "It's probably because his master Zhang Julu's death that made Wei Jingtang make up his mind." Huang Fushi was still indignant. "It's a pity that Ji province only produced 1 Wei Jingtang." Su Fengnian said expressionlessly, "Why don't you say that the Liang dynasty only produced 1 Zhang Julu?" After a short silence, Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It seems like you have to go to Yuzhou alone. I'll go to Jibei to find Yul Wandao and take a look at that Wei Jingtang." Huang Fushi's heart trembled and he said in shock, "Your Highness, are you going to take the risk and personally lead the troops out of the calabash?" Without waiting for Su Fengnian to speak, Huang Fushi jumped off the carriage and rushed to the front of the post house. He then knelt down with a thump and did not say a word. He just knelt there. Yu Dilong hurriedly stopped the carriage. After Su Fengnian got off the carriage, he walked over to help this general of Yuzhou who had lost his composure. However, Huang Fushi, who was once mocked by the officials of Lingzhou as the #1 watchdog under Mount Qingliang, refused to get up. Su Fengnian said in a low voice, "Get up." Chapter 1363. Huang Fujin lay prone on the post road and said in a dull voice, "If I don't stop His Highness today, I will be scolded to death by Protector General Chu, Commander Yen, and Second Princess tomorrow." A king of Beiliang who killed tens of thousands of enemies and died in battle can't compare to a king of Beiliang who's living well in Beiliang. Su Fengnian frowned. "I don't need you to remind me of this. I know better than anyone what's important. Don't worry, I'll bring me Fingjia and Fan Shaochai. Besides, although my realm isn't as good as before, it's not hard for me to escape and protect myself. There aren't many top experts left in Beimang." Huang Fujin was determined to be stubborn to the end. He looked up at Su Fengnian and asked, "What if Tuoba Bodhisattva comes to kill you?" Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Tuoba Bodhisattva is on his way to Lu province. Besides, have you forgotten about Su Yanbing who's about to finish things off at the border of Yuzhou?" Seeing that Huang Fujin was still unwilling to get up, Su Fengnian kicked him and said angrily, Huang Fujin, your death remonstrance is 1,000 miles away from the imperial censor of Grand Peace City. Get up. Huang Fujin got up slowly and hesitated for a moment before saying softly, Your Highness, I'll say something rebellious. You can't die. If you die, I'll never be able to become the Gu Jiantang of Beiliang. Su Fengnian only glanced at Huang Fujin's heartfelt words and dismissed them with a smile. Then, he and Yu Dilong each got on a horse and rode away with Mi Fingjie and Fan Shaochai. Huang Fujin didn't wipe the sweat off his forehead. Both sides knew that what Huang Fujin really wanted to say wasn't the Gu Jiantang of Beiliang, but the Su Shao of Liang dynasty. One day, he would be crowned king. Huang Fujin didn't mind that Su Fengnian knew about his ambitions. The four riders galloped eastward on the post road. Lu Long, whose horsemanship was already very exquisite, turned his head to look at the cavalry and asked, Master, what did this Yuzhou general say? What oil and what lantern? Su Fengnian laughed and said, You want to say that he's not easy to deal with. Who did you learn from? Junior sister Wang Xing or junior brother Lu Yunzhang? The child chuckled. Su Fengnian teased, missing Wang Xing. Then why didn't you go to Beimang with her? The child quickly put on a straight face and said seriously, She went to Beimang with that white fox face to train her martial arts. How can I be a burden to her? She said that when we return to Xingliang, she will definitely beat me and Lu Yunzhang alone. Su Fengnian said meaningfully, You've already lost half the battle. Yu Dilong was stunned. Junior sister, are you really able to master the most powerful sword art in Beimang? Then, he couldn't help but laugh to himself. Su Fengnian shook his head. The taciturn Mi Fingjie said worriedly, In the end, Ji province is not Beiliang. There are many hidden spies. Your Highness should be careful. Su Fengnian nodded. Mi Fingjie secretly glanced at the female sacrificial warrior, Fan Shaochai. This mysterious grandmaster didn't understand why Su Fengnian wanted to bring her along. Mi Fingjie was determined to keep a close eye on her, just in case. Fan Shaochai looked ahead with an indifferent expression. Ji province was once part of northern Han. In fact, it wasn't just the Han family of Ji province. Northern Han's rule had lasted for more than 160 years. Too many aristocratic families had once been Northern Han subjects. As for her Fan family, it had been loyal for generations. Su Fengnian suddenly said, This time, you might not have the opportunity to visit the graves of the Fan family's ancestors. If you decide to stay in Ji province, I can agree to it right now. You don't need to be in a hurry to answer. We can talk about it when we get there. Fan Shaochai suddenly bit her lip, causing blood to seep out. Her eyes were crazed. She laughed, I don't have the face to visit the graves of my ancestors. Since I can't kill you, and don't even dare to attack you, I can watch you die on the battlefield with my own eyes. The famed sword in Mi Fingjie's case shook violently. He angrily shouted, Fan Shaochai. Are you seeking death? Fan Shaochai's shoulders trembled slightly. Her laughter grew louder and louder. Sitting high on her horse, her face was full of disdain. TSK, TSK. A mysterious finger expert. I am truly afraid of death. Su Fengnian calmly said, Enough. Mi Fingjie took a deep breath. Fan Shaochai immediately retracted her crazed aura. Their mounts paused for no reason. The neglected child, Yu Dilong, looked at the old man who reached out to support the sword case, and then looked at the young woman whose fingers were a little green from holding the reins. This eldest disciple of Su Fengnian secretly curled his lips. Su Fengnian closed his eyes. He knew that many people had already begun to die in Yuzhou. The Hanlin predecessors of the Liang dynasty were not stingy with their writing when they wrote the history of Northern Han. Unlike the deliberate belittling of Vietnam and Tang, they were especially appreciative of Northern Han, especially Ji Province. They called it, Ji Province is full of heroes. They were all brave warriors who died with a clear conscience. However, in the confrontation with the butcher Su Shao, the Fan family, the mainstay of the Northern Han army, had one soldier after another bravely sacrificed themselves. After the Han family had submitted to the Liang dynasty and had their entire family executed, the veteran General Yang Shenxing was the first to be trapped in the Guangling circuit. Ji Province was like an old man past his prime who refused to accept his old age. In the end, it was truly old. As the sun set in the west, two people stood side by side on the city walls of Transverse Water City, located at the forefront of northern Ji. The man wearing the uniform of a Liang civil official was in his 40s. He had a scholarly and refined temperament, but his face had the rough and weathered appearance of someone who had lived on the border for a long time. He was Transverse Water City's garrison general, Wei Jingtang, second in the imperial examination in the 9th year of Yonghui. However, he did not choose to use the Hanlin Academy as a springboard for his career. Instead, he first observed politics in the Ministry of War for half a year. Very quickly, he requested to be transferred to the border of Liaodong. As a result, Wei Jingtang came to Ji Province. First, he served as the county magistrate of southern Ji. As his official rank grew higher and higher, the area under his jurisdiction grew closer and closer to the border of Ji Province. Finally, he became the commanding officer of the military administration of Transverse Water City. He was only at the 4th rank. In terms of profiting, as long as he did not touch the border trade, he could not even compare to the county magistrates of Jiangnan. In terms of official prestige, he was far inferior to the outstanding figures who had passed the imperial examinations. There was a man from the same hometown as him who was only a top 3 jinshi. When he was young, he had a grudge with him. In the capital, he was only the commanding officer of the Ministry of War. Over the years, he had been making things difficult for him. Previously, when the Ministry of War was observing politics at the border, there was a man from the same year who brought a letter to Wei Jingtang. In the letter, he asked Wei Jingtang how the sandstorm in the northwest tastes. He even threatened to make Wei Jingtang drink in this godforsaken place for the rest of his life. Wei Jingtang smiled at this. That fellow student who had clung on to the capital's third Prince Jean would probably never be able to understand how the barren desert frontier fortress in his eyes was, and how it could make a scholar give up his brush and join the army without regret. The young general standing beside Wei Jingtang was the young commanding officer of the Yuzhou cavalry, Yu Wandao. Previously, when the Beimang cavalry demonstrated their power outside the pass, Liu Yanlang gave up on Silver Sparrow City, leaving behind only a few old and weak soldiers and a dozen or so officials who didn't know how to show respect to their superiors. Yu Wandao's cavalry wasn't in a hurry to enter the city. Instead, they set up camp outside Silver Sparrow City. When they realized that there wasn't any movement in Transverse Water City, they entered the city alone 2 days ago to find Wei Jingtang. After that, Yu Wandao's subordinates took over the granary of Silver Sparrow City. Wei Jingtang had the right to control it, but he just turned a blind eye to it. Some of his subordinates were angry, but Wei Jingtang only said one sentence: Transverse Water City can't touch Silver Sparrow's grain. If we take even 1 grain, someone will lose his position. However, instead of being treated as an invasion by the Beimang barbarians, what's wrong with handing it over to someone who is willing to draw a blade against the Beimang? The extraordinarily handsome Yu Wandao didn't just have the peerless blade passed down from his ancestors, Great Luan, on his waist, he also had a brand new cold blade that was equally eye-piercing. He asked softly, Lord Wei, I still don't understand. However, I still want to thank you on behalf of the Beiliang. Wei Jingtang was silent. His expression was resolute as he gazed at the endless desert of yellow sand. Not moving south was a crime. Allowing the Silver Sparrow's grain to be taken by the Yuzhou cavalry was an even greater crime. If that official from the Ministry of War returned to the capital and wrote a report, saying a few words of incompetence in governance, it would be another crime. Being punished for several crimes was already enough for Wei Jingtang to lose his head. Those old brothers of his who had exchanged their lives with him in Transverse Autumn City didn't understand either. Some of them almost wanted to tie him up and take him to Jinan, saying that Transverse Water City could be defended to the death by them. They didn't need Wei Jingtang alone. However, Wei Jingtang still stood here in the end. Yu Wandao laughed. Although there are some people from Jizhou who risked their lives to support the grain supply for my 10,000 cavalry, without the Silver Sparrow's granary, we would still be stretched thin today. That Yuan Tingshan can't wait to give me a taste of his own medicine. Wei Jingtang said impartially, although his character is like a clown and is loathsome, I have to admit that this man's management and command of troops is not bad. Yu Wandao looked at the wisps of smoke rising from several tens of miles away, then smiled and said, Lord Wei, just take it that I'm just trying to spite you. Today, I'm going to teach you one thing. Although the cavalry of Tranquil Province is not as strong as the cavalry of Liang Province, they are much stronger than your northern Ji cavalry. Wei Jingtang smiled faintly and said helplessly, I'll wait and see. Yu Wandao turned around and was about to leave when he suddenly turned back. He took down the cold blade from his waist and placed it on the city wall. With a solemn expression, he said, Lord Wei, whether you accept it or not, I'll give you this cold blade. I, Bai Liang, respect all those who dare to fight to the death. Wei Jingtang didn't pick up the cold blade. He smiled and asked, even if I'm the Grand Secretary's disciple? Even if I've been scolding General Su Shao as a traitor to the country? Yu Wandao laughed and cupped his fists. He left the cold blade behind and left in a carefree manner. Wei Jingtang watched as the eldest grandson of the Yu family, who was supposed to have a bright future in Li Yang's officialdom, walked down the city wall. He retracted his gaze and looked at the Bailiang blade. He said softly, What a Bailiang! Chapter 1364. Wei Jingtang raised his head to look at the sky, his eyes brimming with tears. He smiled and said, Teacher, in your letter, you asked me if I dared to go down and drink with you. Student Wei Jingtang is more than happy to do so. Outside the mouth of the gourd in Yuzhou, in a massive commander's tent that was heavily guarded by soldiers, the coals produced by the finest carp kiln burned fiercely, blocking out the spring chill. Of the 30-some people in the tent, half of them were dressed in the armor of Beimang's high-ranking military officers, while the other half were dressed in the uniform of the Southern Dynasty's Ministry of War. The latter were all between 20 and 30 years old. At this moment, the vanguard of the army had already begun to break through the mouth of the gourd. The vanguard had over 90,000 people, with the main general, Yang Yuanzhan, commanding the various troops. The main force was the 30,000 personal soldiers of this great general of Beimang, while the various garrisons of Dragon Waste Province had 40,000 soldiers. However, the true elites were the 20,000 Ruan cavalry under the command of the Southern Dynasty's assistant minister of the Ministry of War. The Ruan Mountains had always been an important source of troops for the elite cavalry of the northern plains. It produced fine horses, but it also produced strong soldiers. Most importantly, compared to other places, the Ruan cavalry were more obedient, willing to give up their lives and daring to fight to the death. Beimang and Liang had fought so many great battles during Yonghui's reign. The valiance displayed by the Ruan cavalry had even caused many famous generals of the Central Plains to raise their eyebrows. Back then, even the old Grand Secretary of Liang had to admit that the barbarians here had the style of the Great Qin. Other than the vanguard led by Yang Yuanzhan, who had already driven south, the remaining 200,000 soldiers were still biding their time outside the mouth of the gourd. Compared to the invasions of the nomads in history, this expedition south to Beimang was clearly more methodical. Yang Yuanzhan was the nominal commander-in-chief of Beimang's eastern front. However, after Yang Yuanzhan led the troops out, there was no chaos in the seemingly leaderless commander's tent. Countless orders for the deployment of troops were accurately issued from here to the various armies. This was all thanks to Dongjue, the #1 military and political figure in the Southern Dynasty. After he became the king of the Southern Courtyard, he focused on restructuring the Ministry of War and added the position of strategist in front of the curtains. He took the opportunity to promote a large group of young people to become the staff of the Ministry of War. Everyone was bestowed with fine clothes and jade belts by the emperor. Hence, they were nicknamed strategist in front of the curtains. Even though their ranks were not high, they were considered to be of low status and power. As long as the strategies they formulated were reviewed by the Ministry of War in the Western capital, not to mention the generals of the towns and the prairie lord, even the prefectures of the various provinces and generals like Yang Yuanzhan and Hong Jingyan had to follow the rules. After the start of the war, these strategists all left the Ministry of War and followed the army. Most of them rushed to the Eastern Front. Dongjue gave them the power to act according to the circumstances. Of course, it was impossible for there to be no opposition in the imperial court in the western capital. However, Fatty Dong didn't pay much attention to them and even shamelessly used Her Majesty's imperial edict as a shield. Furthermore, the young people who rose to the center of the imperial court overnight were mostly from the Yelu and Murong surnames, or the flaming and plump aristocrats from Longguan. They were the young talents from the North, 7, South, and 3 surnames A in Beimang. It could be said that Dongjue's exceptional promotion had captured almost all the top aristocrats in Beimang in one fell swoop. As a result, the saliva in the western capital didn't even need to be refuted by the king of the South Courtyard, who knew how to conduct himself. However, Beimang soon realized how insidious and cunning Fatty Dong was. These strategists were divided into two groups. One group went to the Eastern Front to impede General Yang Yuanzhan, and the other group went to the Western Front where General Liu Gui was. Only the Central Front didn't have any strategists. However, the general situation had been determined. In addition, the war in the north of Liangzhou was destined to be the deadliest and bloodiest. It wasn't easy to gain military merits there. Therefore, the old and cunning elders behind the strategists could only pinch their noses and admit defeat. However, when almost everyone thought that the Battle of Huluku in Yuzhou was just a side dish to the war in Liangzhou, the king of the South Courtyard, Dongjue, actually came here in person and joined a group of strategists. In the military tent as spacious as a hall, Dongjue stood at the northernmost position at one end of the long table. On the table was a sand table with mountains, rivers, and cities. The terrain of Huluku could be seen at a glance. In the last years of the Great Feng Dynasty, there was a generation of mathematicians who proposed the tilt reordering method in their works. Later, there was the 6 directions map. After more than 300 years of improvement, Wang Longshe proposed the theory of altitude, which made the sand table technology reach its peak. Therefore, today's sand table was so delicate and accurate that it was enough to stun the ancients. On this sand table, the system of Huluku Wu Castle created by Hong Xinjia was most directly reflected. The 3 cities, 6 passes, and 200 strongholds were all marked on the sand table. As the number of beacon towers was too small, only those important beacon towers that occupied dangerous places were marked with small flags less than an inch long. The king of the South Courtyard, who was travel-worn, had just arrived here with hundreds of Dong family's cavalrymen. After drinking a mouthful of coarse milk tea with a strong smell of mutton to drive away the cold, he asked a young strategist from a major clan in Gusai province to tell him the progress of the Battle of Huluku Wu Castle. The latter, who was holding a slender long pole made of jasper, drew a big circle on the sand table and said loudly, "Bailiang put Hong Xinjia in an important position. By the beginning of this spring, he has built 214 strongholds in Huluku in Yuzhou province." The Battle of Mount Daxing in Liang province started in the first year of Yonghui province. Upon hearing this, a prairie lord, who was planning to come to Yuzhou province to snatch food, people, and military exploits, could not help but roll his eyes and say, "Don't talk about those boring things. Just tell us where our sons have fought their way to Huluku Wu Castle and how many heads they have chopped off. It's easy for you to say it, kid, but King Dong, and we can also hear it clearly. Every time I hear you people who have read books talking about it, I feel like I'm going to doze off. Dong Zhuo did not even look at that big talker, but stared at the sand table and said slowly, "Go on." The Prairie Lord immediately shrunk his neck and dared not to act rashly. The strategist continued, Mount Daxing in Liang Province was first proposed by the Han family of Ji Province. Their original intention was to reduce the pressure of grain and fodder supply when Liang Province launched the war in the early days. Later on, Liang Province took the opportunity to withdraw all the border armies in Ji Province and move them inwards to strengthen the internal defense and shorten the transportation distance of grain and fodder. Once the war broke out, they could use the fort to slow down the vanguard of the enemy, and then the main force in the rear would wait for an opportunity to strike. However, over the past 10 years, Liang Province has purposely placed more emphasis on the two Liao provinces and neglected Ji Province. Obviously, they have the intention to use Ji Province, a soft persimmon, as the opening of Yuzhou Province. As long as our army chooses Ji Province as the breakthrough point, Beiliang and the two Liao provinces will be able to launch a pincer attack. The strategist pointed at somewhere north of Huluku Wu Castle with the long jasper pole in his hand. Beiliang's fort is especially majestic. The big fort has more than 1,000 steps around it, and the small fort has more than 800 steps around it. The big fort has 600 steps around it, and the small fort has 300 steps around it. Moreover, the fort has never had a fixed shape. It is closely connected to the geography of Huluku Wu Castle, tightly controlling the river valley. Most of the walls are made of rammed earth, and some of them are covered with bricks. Many forts have several layers inside and outside, with different heights. If we are careless, even if we successfully break through the fort's gate, we will still have to fight a tough battle. This is enough to show Hong Xinjia's sinister intentions. For example, the group of forts here at Huluku Wu Castle, with the Jujube Horse Fort as the core, and the Green Wind Fort Be Rising Fort and the other 18 forts surrounding and protecting them. In total, there are 3,400 garrison soldiers. The first fierce battle between the two sides will definitely take place here. The jade pole in his hand shifted slightly to the south. If Beiliang's Huluku Wu Castle was only blocked by these forts, it would not be worth mentioning. However, after Chen Jibao became the governor of Beiliang, 3 towering and sturdy cities were built at Huluku Wu Castle. Although they are far inferior to the number 1 town in the northwest, Huda City, they are definitely not to be underestimated. This Crouching Bao City, built against the mountain, is one of them. In fact, all the forts in the northern line of defense at Huluku Wu Castle are attached to Crouching Bao City. Unlike the forts that only defend to the death, the 3 cities of Huluku Wu Castle each have a different number of elite cavalry troops from Yuzhou. A major 3rd-ranked general from Ju Province laughed and said that Yuzhou also has a capable cavalry troop. I thought that Yan Wenluan's subordinates were only a group of soldiers crawling like turtles. The story of turtles crawling like turtles had been circulating in Beimang for a long time. In the past 20 years, most of the battles in Liangmang took place on the northern line of defense in Liangzhou. Yuzhou had always been sparse. Beiliang infantry commander Yan Wenluan, this old tiger, had no power to speak of in the eyes of Beimang. The younger Beimang generals were somewhat convinced by Beiliang governor Chu Lushan or the new cavalry commander Yuan Zuozong. After all, Yuan Zuozong's military achievements in the several large-scale battles in the hinterland of Beimang many years ago were obvious to all. That Lu Qiu'er even chased the current king of South Courtyard for almost 1,000 li. Moreover, Beimang's cavalry was like the wind. How could they pay attention to slow infantry? Therefore, Yan Wenluan had the nickname of Turtle General in Beimang. Dong Zhuo finally spoke with a solemn expression. All of you are clearly aware that my Dong clan army consists mostly of infantrymen. But perhaps all of you aren't aware that I, Dong Zhuo, learned from Yan Wenluan when I first trained my infantrymen. Although now it's enough to look down on most of the Yuzhou infantry, Yan Wenluan, who you laughed at as Turtle General, has 1,000 heavy armored soldiers under his command. His fighting strength is still worthy of being called the world's #1 infantry troop. How's the fighting strength of Dong infantry? Do I need to boast? Dong Zhuo raised his head and looked at the people present with cold eyes. The Yuzhou cavalry is not good enough. Don't forget that the Longxiang army that turned our Gusai province into a sieve was based on the Yuzhou cavalry. Dong Zhuo smiled gloomily, revealing his white teeth. Right, I forgot to tell you a secret. After General Yang Yuanzhan learned that he was going to fight Yan Wenluan, he had already made arrangements for his funeral. If you think that I, Dong Zhuo, am boosting the morale of others and diminishing my own prestige, it's fine. I'll say the ugly words first. When the time comes, whoever is hurt by the Yuzhou garrison, remember not to complain to me or His Majesty. Chapter 1365. The armored generals present were all a bit resentful, but the strategists who had been treated with disdain recently only felt pleased. A while ago, the latter patiently explained the terrain, structure, and distribution of troops to the vanguard generals in detail, down to the details of each fort and each beacon. This seemingly trivial information was precious military intelligence obtained by Beimang's spies with their blood. Only, at that time, most of the military officers in the army were just yawning. In their eyes, wherever Beimang's iron cavalry went, those who surrendered would be killed, and those who didn't would be killed even more. War was just that simple. Why would they need to embroider like a woman? This kind of deep-rooted understanding could not be changed by the strategists who were only minor 6th rank and major 7th rank. However, the arrival of South Courtyard's King Dong Zhuo, who was currently in the limelight, made all of the generals more or less alert. This was especially true when he mentioned Great General Yang Yuanzhan's funeral arrangements. It made several of Yang Yuanzhan's trusted generals break out in cold sweat. Under the hint of Dong Zhuo's gaze, the strategists who felt refreshed began to speak tirelessly. Using continuous forts to block our army's attack was just the naive view of the civil officials in Li Yang's imperial court more than 10 years ago. In fact, back then, the embryonic form of North Ji Castle had already clearly told both sides that without a majestic city as the core of the defense, Li Yang's idea of making Mang cavalry unable to penetrate deep into the enemy was too naive. There were many forts in North Ji Castle at that time, with some 50 li away and some 30 li close. They could be said to be closely distributed to the crucial points of defense. However, back then, our great Mang used countless successful surprise attacks to prove one thing, that forts were indeed the key points of defense. Wanting to stop a nimble cavalry army from advancing south was just a pipe dream. Ji province's forts were like trees in a forest, and the troops were divided into different areas. How could they dare to fight? Therefore, later on, Li Yang's imperial censors impeached those North Ji Castle's officers, scolding them that Ko Da-ji hid like a turtle. Ko Xiaoji still did not dare to fight, only daring to fight when the Ko Da-ji retreated several hundred li. When he spoke up to hear, the strategist revealed a faint smile. He reached out his hand and pointed at his own nose. And the Li Yang imperial censors esteemed lords are talking about is precisely our northern Mang cavalry. Everyone in the tent burst into laughter. Even Dong Zhuo had a faint smile on his face. A grassland chief, who had tens of thousands of herdsmen under his command, laughed out loud and said, Huyan Junji, if you had said that earlier, we wouldn't have been so impatient. You always talk about how formidable those forts in Yu province are. But if you don't properly praise us great Mang boys, wouldn't we, the rough men who feel that learning to read is even more terrifying than being beheaded, not be able to listen? This time, Dong Zhuo came to Yu province mainly to pour cold water on the generals in the East Front, but he also had the intention of improving the stiff relationship between strategists and generals with real power. In Beimang, especially in the northern grassland royal court, there was only one word to describe it: rough. As the #1 official in the southern court, what Dong Zhuo wanted to do was to combine the brains of the southern court with the military force of the northern court. Not only should the two sides not hinder each other, they should also try their best to cooperate. This was definitely not a daydream of Dongzhuo, because those strategists who knew the essence of the war in the Central Plains and were proficient in military strategies on paper were in the same boat as the generals on the front line. After all, they were bound together for good or ill. As long as Dongzhuo broke through the window paper, the two sides would be able to work together as one. They would earn military merits on horseback and divide military merits on horseback. If they could take down Yu Province and Beiliang in one go, it would be tantamount to taking off the clothes of this pretentious noble lady in the Central Plains. By then, the iron cavalry of Beimang would be unstoppable, and the ruler of the Central Plains would be surnamed Murong, just like His Majesty. Dongzhuo subconsciously clenched his teeth, his eyes blazing. As long as he could take down Beiliang, the general trend would be in the hands of Beimang. In the future, it would be impossible to rely on the famous generals of Liang to stop the iron cavalry from going south. The only real enemy of Beimang was the tall cities that were in the way. Thinking of this, Dongzhuo walked to a side table in the tent. On the table, there was a wooden model of the three cities inside the gourd mouth. It was made by skilled craftsmen. The Taiping order had ordered the craftsmen in the western capital to make it carefully. There were about 40 of them, including all the important cities in Beiliang. They were specially made for the generals on the front line to know the structure of the cities in Beiliang. There were 8 of them in Yuzhou on the eastern front. 3 of them were placed in the tent for the time being. At that time, the carriage was bumpy, and the wooden model made from Chongqing City was broken into pieces. Many strategists went to the imperial clan official in charge of the delivery to ask for an explanation. That guy, who had the surname Yilu, picked his nose and said whatever he wanted. At that time, there were dozens of strong retainers behind him. They had already taken out their swords and were about to chop those strategists. Then, a few days later, an imperial edict arrived. That imperial clan official was beheaded on the spot, and all his retainers were sentenced to death. The brand new wooden model from Chongqing City was also sent. The eunuch who delivered the edict only said to the official's backer, "This model was personally supervised by the Taiping order." Therefore, the trembling Yilu general immediately gave up the idea of crying injustice for his nephew. The strategists once again described the structure of the wooden model to the generals in the tent. They explained what the battlements were, what the parapets were, what the horse-faced platform was, and what the various crossbow configurations were, interspersed with the battles of the Central Plains in a certain dynasty. When the strategist whose mouth was dry finally finished speaking, Dongzhuo said in a deep voice, "Everyone, the cities in the Central Plains are filled with traps, and the layout is exquisite. You must remember one thing. As siege generals, the more we know how to defend a city, the more lives we, the northern Mang men, can have." Dongzhuo raised his arm and pointed in the direction of the gourd. Crouching Bao City is the first city in Yuzhou. In order to uproot it, we will definitely have thousands or even tens of thousands of people die there. It is destined that we will never be able to return to our hometown on the grassland. Of course, I hope that everyone in our army can enter the hinterland of Yuzhou alive. We can even fight all the way to Xiangfan and Liang and the southern border guarded by the King of Yan. We can see what the sea looks like. But this is not realistic. People will die in war. Otherwise, General Yang Yuanzhan would not fight this battle with the determination to die. Dongzhuo's face suddenly turned ferocious. He said sternly, "I, Dongzhuo, came here today just to say a few words from my heart. Even if my Beimang men have to die, they will die in a place further south." Chapter 1366. If I have to die, I don't want to die in Beiliang, where the land is barren and the territory is narrow. I want to die in the rich Central Plains, under Grand Peace City, on the shores of the South Sea. Beimang's 90,000 vanguard troops poured into the mouth of the gourd like a flood bursting through a dam. Those forts were like unremarkable pebbles on a shoal, instantly submerged. The northernmost beehive fort at the mouth of the gorge, together with the 6 beacons and 197 Yuzhou officers, all died in battle, without a single arrow remaining. Clear Phoenix Fort was broken through. 362 men, all unsheathed cold blades, died in battle. White Horse Fort was broken through. 213 men, without a single place within the fort, all died in battle. At the heart of the northern group of forts at the mouth of the gorge was Jujube Horse Village. Corpses were strewn everywhere. Apart from the Baimang cavalry, who had been seriously injured and flustered, who added a blade to the back of the corpses, not a single person died while fleeing. Their wounds were all in front of their bodies. Apart from the last Chicken Crow village in the south, all of the 18 forts around Jujube Horse Village were broken through by the Baimang army. Not a single person surrendered. Chicken Crow Village was different from the other forts, which were mostly built in river valleys. It was located on a precipitous cliff of a short mountain. Countless Baimang cavalry quickly passed by the 2 sides of the mountain, whistling through the air like the wind. Most likely in pursuit of speed, they wanted to push out of Crouching Bao City as quickly as possible. They didn't pay any attention to this isolated and unimportant little village. Within the village, there wasn't even a commander-in-chief, but a mere deputy commander-in-chief. When all of the soldiers were gathered together, there were more than 230 of them. Everyone could clearly hear the loud trampling of Baimang horses at the foot of the mountain, as well as the strange cries of those northern barbarians as they galloped forward. Chicken Crow Village's deputy commander-in-chief, Tang Yanchao, was a tall, middle-aged man. He was a classic veteran ruffian from the border. Alcohol was prohibited in the army, and there were several times where he had messed up matters because of alcohol. This man, who could have become a commander-in-chief long ago, was wasting his time in Chicken Crow Village. Every time he drank, Tang Yanchao would brag to his mostly young subordinates about how he had once been the personal guard of the previous cavalry deputy commander, Wei Taizhan, and how he had followed the commander-in-chief in his early years and slaughtered his way through Baimang territory. The youngsters in the village at first, but after years and years of listening to those things, calluses. As a result, every time Tang Yanchao bragged after drinking, many people would shake their heads and make faces. If Tang Yanchao wasn't drunk to death and saw these little bastards imitating him behind his back, he wouldn't get angry to see these little bastards to not know how to respect a hero to respect. In the past, even when Yuzhou generals came to patrol the village, Tang Yanchao, who didn't wear his armor neatly, was dressed meticulously for the first time. Even his sloppy beard had been shaved off, making him almost unrecognizable as the great deputy commander-in-chief. If it were any other time, there would definitely be a few bold young soldiers who would approach him with a mischievous smile and say, "Oh, the deputy commander-in-chief looks like a dog. Why haven't you found your sister-in-law yet?" However, at this moment, most people only had heavy hearts and couldn't squeeze out a smile. The elders from the stronghold stood beside Tang Yanchao and were also silently inspecting the armor and crossbow sabers. Tang Yanchao looked around and said indifferently, "Those who aren't over 20 years old, and those who are the only children in your families, stand obediently where you are. Those who aren't, take a step forward." Not counting Tang Yanchao and the 7 people on his left and right, more than half of the 221 people in front had walked out. Tang Yanchao looked over and suddenly pointed at a baby-faced soldier and scolded with a smile, "Bai Youfu, if I remember correctly, you're only 18 years old. You don't even look like you're 15. Scram back." Look, the great deputy commander-in-chief had finally put on some airs of this official, but he was immediately exposed after a few words. He deserved to be called "this old man" for the rest of his life. The soldier named Bai Youfu blushed and said loudly, "Father said that it's a matter of course for soldiers to fight and be paid. Then, it's also a matter of course to go to the battlefield and kill the enemy." Tang Yanchao put one hand on the Bailiang saber at his waist and said with a smile, "Then, didn't your mother secretly tell you not to fight with your life?" Bai Youfu's face was full of embarrassment. He said softly, "She really did. Laughter immediately broke out. After Tang Yanchao raised his hand, the village returned to its previous silence. This deputy commander-in-chief, who probably hadn't even heard of the Yuzhou provincial governor, said in a deep voice, "General Yan previously ordered that our calabash fort only needed to defend to the death and not go out to meet the enemy." Tang Yanchao paused for a moment. "Therefore, I, Tang Yanchao, am going out to kill the barbarians this time because I, Tang Yanchao, have disobeyed military orders. Those who stand in place and stay in the fort, and those who step out don't need to go down the mountain. Yes, once we go down the mountain, we'll be stuck at the foot of the mountain for the rest of our lives. There's nothing to hide. No one's an idiot. I, Tang Yanchao, have lived for 40 years and have gone to the battlefield more than 40 times. If we count it up, it's more than once a year. Other than not being able to find a wife in this life, there's nothing else to say. You kids who haven't even reached the age of 20, it's still too early for you to live long enough. Live well." Tang Yanchao pointed to the north and said fiercely, "This old man can't become a commander-in-chief or a high-ranking official. It's not embarrassing. But Li Jing, Hu Lin, and Lu Ziyuan in the fort in the north must have died in battle. If this old man hides and doesn't die, I can't afford to lose this face. Even if this old man can afford to lose this face, our pheasant fort can't." Tang Yanchao roared angrily, "Those who step out, follow this old man. When we get down there and there's no military law to control us, Tang Yanchao will drink to his heart's content with my brothers." On this day, Pheasant Fort's vice-captain, Tang Yanchao, was the first to die at the foot of the mountain outside the fort. Soon after, the remaining 80 people who were under the age of 20 also died in battle. Among them, Bai Youfu was stabbed in the neck by a Beimang cavalryman who was charging at full speed. Before he died, he only had one thought. It would be even better if he could fight his way into Beimang territory and die there. Not long after, a white-haired, dignified old general stopped his horse at the foot of the mountain. After dismounting, he looked at the bloody battlefield where the corpses had been split into two groups. The old man calmly asked a general whose armor was stained with blood beside him, "How many people did we lose?" The general wiped his face fiercely. "The bows and crossbows of the fort in Yuzhou are extremely sharp, and everyone fought to the death. I only know that over 4,000 of us died in battle, and even more were injured." It was precisely the commander of the Eastern Front, Yang Yuanzhan. His expression was grave as he sighed heavily. They still hadn't seen Crouching Bao City of the Three Cities at the Gourd Gate, nor had they seen Yan Wenwan's elite infantry. Yang Yuanzhan looked at the pheasant fort on the mountain that was destined to be empty and muttered to himself, "There's no way to fight this battle." Chapter 1367. After Su Fingnian entered Jizhou, he donned a mask made of roots. This mask was the handiwork of the witch of the southern border, Shu Xiu. When Su Fingnian had snuck into Beimang, it was thanks to these ingenious items. The four of them crossed the border. The spies of the Fu Shui chamber had long since prepared 4 impeccable travel documents. At present, the tyrants of Beiliang were like a swarm of ants that had been disturbed by a child. They all fled for their lives. Su Fingnian's meager group of 4 was completely inconspicuous. Fan Shaochai knew that he was going to Hengshui City in Ji North to meet with Yule Wandao and Wei Jingtang. However, although the 4 of them traveled day and night without rest, they did not take the shortest route. Instead, they traveled directly into the heart of Jizhou. Ultimately, they arrived at Dezhan City, which had been built during the last years of the Great Feng dynasty. Su Fingnian was in no hurry to enter the city. Instead, he reined in his horse and stopped on the official road outside the city. With a complicated expression, he gazed at the silent city. As the former capital of northern Han, it could be said that the city was filled with the relatives of officials, and nobles. Back then, Su Shao, who was one of the top generals, had led an army to attack northern Han. All of Jizhou had been trampled to pieces by the armored cavalry of the Su family. Only Dajian City had managed to escape the calamity. When the army slowly approached the city, disaster was imminent. That night, countless scholars drank and sang. It was said that one could smell the strong scent of alcohol from 3 li outside the city. As a result, there was the story of 300 Han retainers, drunk to death in one night. Fan Shaochai had wandered from place to place due to the destruction of her country and her family. However, as a descendant of the loyal and fierce Fan clan, even though she had been fleeing for her life was generally stable. She had once lived in Dajian City for more than half a year. She did not have to worry about food or clothing, enjoying the lanterns during the Lantern Festival and going on field trips. At that time, she still had many naive thoughts. If Northern Han were still around, perhaps she would have lived a more extravagant life. She would have married a handsome young man from an aristocratic family of equal social status. They would have helped each other in difficult times, assisted her husband and taught her children, and grown old together. Her grandfather, father, and so many uncles wouldn't have died on the battlefield. In the end, she was the only one left. If she hadn't been chosen by Zhao Guo, then the Fan family wouldn't even have a single person to worship their ancestors. Mi Fingjie, who was obsessed with martial arts, did not have such sentimental feelings. The sword case on his back was already wrapped in a cotton cloth. Just by looking at his posture, this hidden sword cave master, who had left the orthodox Jianghu for too many years, did not have the demeanor of a grandmaster. He looked more like a rigid old servant who did not know the ways of the world. Su Fengnian softly said, "Enter the city." The 4 riders immediately galloped toward the city gate. Aside from Fan Shaochai, whose appearance was enough to arouse pity, who was fiercely glared at by the city guards, nothing else happened. After entering the city from the south, Su Fengnian familiarly led them to the north of the city. Along the way, they passed through streets and alleys. Fan Shaochai was inevitably surprised. Logically speaking, Su Fengnian should not be so familiar with the layout of Dajian City. In the end, the 4 of them stopped at a place called the Green Bamboo Restaurant in the north of the city. The restaurant's business was booming, and it was difficult to find an empty chair on the first floor. The waiter who welcomed the guests was not very good either. He was so greedy that he couldn't get out. He casually led the 4 people's mounts to the stable. After that, he didn't care whether the guests lived or died. If they wanted to eat and drink, just wait. He didn't believe that the 4 foreign guests would change places. The 4 of them had no choice but to wait for an empty table in front of the counter that was piled with green bamboo boards. Su Fengnian was bored to death. He picked up a green bamboo stick. The name of the dish was engraved on it, along with the price. It was not cheap at all. It was almost as expensive as the price in the capital. Of course, now there were 4 more fat lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Su Fengnian was admiring the beautiful calligraphy on the bamboo board. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the clever young waiter going up to the 2nd floor. Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. He most likely figured out the origin of the 4 horses. Before leaving Yu Province, the 4 war horses of Yu Province were replaced by Hezhou courier horses. Before entering the territory of Ji Province, the spies of Whisk Chamber secretly contacted them had also replaced them with 4 high-quality Ji Province war horses. Su Fengnian noticed the suspicious behavior of the waiter. Apart from Yu Dilong, Mi Fingjie and Fan Shaochai also noticed the peculiarity of this green bamboo restaurant. Especially Fan Shaochai, who had just been promoted to the position of Grand Master of Whisk Chamber because of her meritorious service. Under her timid appearance, she was emitting a very well-hidden bloodthirsty aura. Mi Fingjie glanced at her with disgust. It was one thing for such a beautiful woman to be a man of sacrifice and a spy, but why did she like to kill people? Moreover, she usually tortured people to death. Fan Shaochai looked back at Mi Fingjie provocatively. This made the hidden sword cave master, who was already full of resentment towards this crazy woman, even more murderous. If it were not for the king of Beiliang beside him and the sword box on Mi Fingjia's back that contained 8 specially selected famous swords, he would not mind chopping this woman into 8 pieces. Many of the rich guests in the restaurant were actually quite smart. They purposely spoke the truth after drinking. They were all shouting something like, "Lady Boss. Come, give me a toast. Don't worry, I'm a gentleman. I only drink wine and not people. Lady of the Su family, how come I've never seen your husband show his face? What a bastard. In this frigid weather, aren't you afraid that Lady Su will suffer at night? Shopkeeper, I've eaten more than 10 meals in this green bamboo restaurant. My expenses are enough to get me the title of courtesan of a second-rate brothel in Dajian City. You're so good. You don't even let me touch your hand. How can you do business like this in this world?" The first floor was not only filled with dirty and coarse men. There were also many elegant scholars dressed in green robes. Most of them were in their 20s, and they were trying their best to endure the filthy words that were ringing in their ears. As the world in Ji province was not peaceful, the situation of scholars was getting worse and worse. If it were a few years ago, they would have already slammed the table and stood up to curse these ruffians. They would not even dare to talk back, let alone hit them. However, Ji province was in constant turmoil. First, General Yang Shinqing, the divine pillar of Ji province, took away all the old soldiers of Ji province. Then, Yuan Tingshan, the dragon that crossed the river, came to Ji province and became the king of Ji province. Not only was he the son-in-law of Gu Jiantang, he also abducted a woman from the Leaf family of Yanbao in Ji province to be his concubine. Furthermore, he held the military power in his hands. All the sects and clans in Ji province followed his lead. In just a blink of an eye, Yuan Tingshan had dealt with a few local tyrants who refused to submit to him. Now, it was rumored that Beimang had sent tens of thousands of cavalry to the south. The only good news in Ji province was that the grievances of the Han family had been cleared. The current emperor personally gave the posthumous title of Wuxiang, the old patriarch of the Han family, Han Baidu. Not only was the posthumous title of Wuxiang not the second rank of Zhong, or at most, the posthumous title of Wuxiang, which was ranked 5th among the 8 posthumous titles of Wuxiang. Not to mention the widespread posthumous titles before Li Yang seized the world. Ever since the reign of Yonghui, the Zhao family of Li Yang had always been suspicious of valuing the civil and belittling the military when it came to the posthumous titles of their subjects. Putting aside the extreme exception of the king of Beiliang, Su Shao, the few old generals who had made meritorious contributions during the spring and autumn period were given posthumous titles of Zhong, Jian, Jing, and so on. Perhaps only General Gu Jiantang had the chance to ascend to the throne after his death, thus he was given the posthumous title of Wuning. From this, it could be seen that the new emperor of Liyang had made an exception for the Han family, which had said, if the monarch wanted a subject to die, the subject would die generously. Even more exciting was the fact that before the Han family had been cleared of wrongdoing by the imperial court, an astonishing piece of news had already spread from Jizhou. An orphan of the Han family who had escaped calamity had appeared. Following his appearance, a touching story began to circulate in the streets of Jizhou. It was said that the reason why the eldest grandson of the Han family did not die was not because the Han family wanted to leave behind an incense stick, but rather because a loyal and righteous guest of the family had joined forces with a Jianghu martial grandmaster who had received the Han family's favor in his early years. They had carried away the young child behind the Han family's back. Unfortunately, the guest who had died during their escape had said, "The Han family has treated me like a national hero, so I will repay them with a national hero." Although this person's name was obscure, the martial grandmaster was a renowned Jianghu hero from 20 years ago in Jizhou. His strength was extremely close to the first level, and he was known to be invincible among second-level martial grandmasters. His name was Ho Wanhu, nicknamed the Marquis of 10,000 Households. Before the fall of Northern Han, he had served as a military officer and was known to be the enemy of 10,000 people in Jizhou. After the fall of Northern Han, he had raised over 2,000 roaming mounted bandits at the northern border of Jizhou. This person had threatened that there would be a day when he would chop off Su Zhao's head and use it as a wine jug. Unexpectedly, he had quickly disappeared. As it turned out, he had saved the eldest grandson of the Han family. It was rumored that he was currently imprisoned in the underground prison of Yanbao. It could be seen just how many years the Han family had endured humiliation and how many years this Jizhou hero had not seen the light of day. During this period of time, countless people had come to visit the Yanbaoli family under all kinds of pretenses. If it weren't for Yuan Tingshan personally dispatching a cavalry with bright crossbows to deliberately station on the main road of Yanbao, perhaps Yanbao wouldn't even have a moment of peace. A graceful figure appeared at the top of the stairs, but for some reason, it immediately turned around and disappeared in a flash. The sharp-eyed men downstairs immediately hissed. They slapped the table with their hands and knocked the bowl with their chopsticks. As it turned out, the shopkeeper's wife, Lady Su, had given the drinkers downstairs a performance of hugging the pipa half covering the face. How could these men, who never lacked money, let it go? They screamed again and booed to death. This caused those young scholars who couldn't bear it any longer to glare angrily at the neighboring tables. Those with better tempers rolled their eyes, while those with worse tempers directly spat on the ground. There were also some who used hand gestures to greet the scholars' many generations of ancestors. Speaking of which, it was strange. It was true that the proprietress's appearance was outstanding, but she couldn't be considered a devastatingly beautiful woman. However, regardless of whether it was the coarse men or the refined scholars, even if they didn't fall in love at first sight, the more they looked, the more they liked her. The former had shallow eyes, drooling over the woman's heavy breasts, round and perky buttocks, as well as her soul-stirring foxy eyes, as well as her unique style that allowed her to exchange vulgarities with them. The latter had all sorts of reasons. Some said that the Lady Sue's occasional dazed expression while lying behind the counter was very charming. Some said that they saw the proprietress's staunch and chaste nature. There were even more who said that she was naturally close to scholars. It was possible that she was the daughter of one of the old Northern Han's aristocratic families who had wandered among the common people. Chapter 1368. However, there was only one reason why customers only dared to take liberties with their mouths and did not dare to lay their hands on them. There was only one reason why Green Bamboo Restaurant's business was booming. It was because the eldest grandson of the Han family, who had been promoted to the position of commandant of South Luguan by the imperial court, was Su's sworn brother. The waiter had a bright smile on his face, but he was full of suspicions as he ran downstairs. He respectfully invited Su Fengnian and the others to take a seat upstairs. Su Fengnian took out a piece of silver and tossed it to the waiter. The waiter's smile became even brighter as he shouted, "Thank you, young master, for your reward." The waiter was not surprised that the four of them went upstairs, but it was strange that they went directly to a private room on the third floor. There were so many rich guests in Dijon who came here with ulterior motives, but none of them had such an honor. The waiter led the four of them to the door of the room on the third floor and stopped. Su Fengnian pushed the door open and entered. Mi Fingjie stood at the door while Fan Shaochai followed Su Fengnian over the threshold. Fan Shaochai glanced at the woman who stood motionless with a face full of surprise. She was indeed somewhat enchanting, especially the view on her chest, which could make ordinary men want to run over and hold it with both hands to reduce the burden. However, that was all there was to it. Fan Shaochai's beauty was above the woman's, and her style was the complete opposite. Generally speaking, each of them had their own merits, so they minded their own business. After Su Fengnian calmly sat down, he smiled and said, "Qing Zhu and Yang, why are you standing there like a fool? Pour the wine." Even if you want to go back to your old business of selling human meat buns, you still have to get the customers drunk first, right? The woman who was called Qing Zhu Henyang by Su Fingnian, who was wearing Zhang Shanggen's mask, covered her mouth. It was unknown whether she was crying or laughing. She was none other than Qing Zhunyang, whom Su Fingnian had met in Beimang's Ju Zizhou. She was the owner of an unscrupulous inn that sold black wine. Had it not been for that night at the foot of the mountain, when she had unintentionally revealed her true feelings in a drunken stupor, Su Fingnian would not have gotten involved with the Zhongyi stronghold's head Han Fang, nor would he have killed his way to the Shin's thatched hut on Mount Liuyi's Changle Peak. Then, under the oppression of the Shin clan's thatched hut, the eldest grandson of the Han clan might not even be able to be the king of a mountain, and could only switch mountains with Zhang Julu and start anew. Then, in Ji province, there wouldn't be the eldest grandson of the Han clan who walked right into the trap and waited to be executed. There wouldn't be the change of day after day, where Han Fang suddenly turned from a prisoner to a first-rate martyr in the Liang dynasty, and became the last straw that crushed Grand Secretary Zhang Julu to death. It could be said that in these 2 years, the whisk room's men of sacrifice and spies that had been hiding in Ji province were all revolving around a single person, carrying out a secretive and cautious complex operation. This lucky person was precisely Han Fang, who had led 21 riders back to Ji province. Even though the whisk room had spent a great deal of effort, manpower, and resources, Han Fang was able to successfully distinguish herself from the others time and time again, probably because of the protection of more than 10 generations of the Han clan's heroic ancestors. Even Su Weisheng and Chu Lushan, who were far away in Beiliang, who were in charge of Ji province's spy affairs, clicked their tongues in amazement. This chess piece was personally planted by Su Fingnian. It was still far from blossoming and bearing fruit. However, for Beiliang, who was now in an even worse situation, with and without Han Fang in Ji province, there was definitely a world of difference. Su Fingnian's trip to Dazhan City in Ji province this time was not to meet Han Fang, but to meet Zhang Xiuqing, who claimed to be an outer disciple of the Tao Te sect. At that time, Zhongyi stockade had fallen and scattered. Only this person had firmly placed his bet on Han Fang and regarded her as a Tao enlightened immortal who could help him rise to the top. Reality proved that this Beimang Daoist, who was born as a scholar in the Southern Dynasty, had not only made the right bet, but also made a lot of money. Now, he had the official position of Liang official and was assisting Lieutenant Han Fang in Nanlu Pass. Of course, Su Fingnian would not recklessly meet Han Fang directly, even though the Liang Zhaoguo, who had been severely injured, was no longer as strong as before in Ji province. The old military chief Yang Xinqing had left, and the new noble Yuan Tingshan had arrived, causing the Zhaoguo in Ji province to be severely reduced. Han Fang's luck was good, but Su Fingnian did not have much confidence in his own luck. After Qing Zhu Henyang sat down, she poured a cup of aged Huadiao wine for Su Fingnian. The wine's aroma quickly filled the air. After the excitement, she was obviously a little uneasy. She asked softly, "Su Lang, why did you come to Dazhan City?" Qing Zhu and Yang did not know about Han Fang's identity as the orphan of the Han family until he was imprisoned. As for Su Fingnian's identity, even Han Fang was only told by an old spy from the Fu Shui house after he had settled down in Ji province. Of course, Han Fang would not say a word about this kind of secret to Qing Zhu and Yang, who had no relatives or friends. This time, Su Fingnian came to Dazhan City to meet Zhang Xiuqing, who also did not dare to reveal anything. Han Fang's situation was turned upside down, and Qing Zhu and Yang naturally rose along with it. She opened this restaurant in Dazhan City, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. She, who lived at the foot of Jui Mountain, was so miserable that she did not even use her name. Perhaps even the lowest-level Beimang spies in Ju province had not heard of her, not to mention Zhao Go in Ji province. To this day, Qing Zhunyang only regarded him as the son of a rich family from Longyao province or Gusai province. As for Su Lang's skills, she was not clear from the beginning to the end. That night in Zhongyi village and the Shin family's thatched cottage, she was dead drunk on the table outside the hotel. Later, the Taoist priest Zhang Xiuqing casually mentioned a few words. He only said that young Master Su's martial arts skills were rarely seen in his life. Even if he was not at the first level, he was not far away. But what she really wanted to know, Zhang Xiuqing did not say. What she really wanted to hear, Zhang Xiuqing did not say either. She did not even know if she would be able to see him again in this lifetime. Today, when she finally saw him, she actually wanted him to leave Dajian City as soon as possible. After all, this was an important military base in Liang. You are a young master from the southern Beimang dynasty. Aren't you afraid of losing your head? Su Fingnian joked, what? Can't I come? Afraid of freeloading. Qing Zhu and Yang did not say anything. She subconsciously reached out to touch the hair on her temples, afraid that he would find fault with her. Although she did not look at the weak woman for a long time, the quick exchange of glances was enough to make her feel ashamed of her own inferiority. What a handsome young lady. Her temperament was excellent. At first glance, she could tell that she was a virtuous young lady from a scholarly family. The key point was that the woman was younger than her. She suddenly seemed to wake up and said in a low voice, Zhenren Zhang actually stayed in the restaurant yesterday. He eats, drinks, and sleeps in the innermost room near the window. He saw you earlier than me and said that he would be here in a while. He had to wait until there were no customers coming in and out. He asked me to pass on a message to you, saying that he hoped that you would be magnanimous enough to forgive him. Su Fingnian grunted in acknowledgement. When they arrived at the Green Bamboo restaurant in Dajian City and were about to meet Zhang Xiuqing, who was now using the pseudonym of Zhang Fuling, Su Fingnian could not help but think of another hidden spy. It was not in Ji province, but outside Tuma Pass, right outside the mouth of the gourd. The reason why he said he was going to meet Yu Wandao and Wei Jingtang in horizontal water city of Ji province was that he wanted to recruit these two spies that he had been operating for several years. Compared to Han Fang in Ji province, the other spy named Song Jiao, could play a role earlier. At that time, when Su Fingnian followed the fish dragon gang led by Lu Nerong to escort them out of Ji province, Song Jiao, was one of the few forces of horse bandits hired by the deputy chief Xiao Chang. Su Fingnian took a fancy to Song Jiao's resolute and ruthless character, and asked Song Jiao to ask Su Fingnian for money and food. Song Jiao did as Su Fingnian had expected. If not for his mediocre martial arts and pitiful background, he actually did not lack anything. If he were in Jiangnan of Liang's Central Plains, it would not be difficult for him to pass the Jinshe exam or become a famous scholar. Therefore, with the support of Captain Guai Yi who had real power, Song Jiao soon became one of the top leaders of horse bandits at the border of Yuzhou. On the surface, he had more than 1,000 strong men under his command. Although this number was not big when compared to the armies of other regions, it might not even be comparable to a paid captain. However, Song Jiao was able to roam freely outside Ji province with only 36 horse bandits. The 1,000 horse bandits under his command, who had not been equipped with excellent equipment, were probably equal to the 3,000 cavalrymen of Ji province. If it was said that Northern Mang already had an idea of Yu Wandao's 10,000 cavalrymen and had prepared a backup plan, then Song Jiao's 1,000 mounted bandits who came and went like the wind, as well as the Song clan bandits who could suddenly grow stronger, they could stab Northern Mang's eastern army at any time and any place. As for whether they would stab Northern Mang's waist or shoulder, Su Fingnian would personally make the arrangements this time. In addition, when Bimang's cobwebs and Jianghu forces infiltrated Yuzhou, Su Fingnian also took the opportunity to quietly disperse many of his men outside the Great Wall. Just as Immortal Chui Wazi of Dao De Sect thought, half of the Tide Listening Pavilion's eagles and hounds were hidden in the Calabash fort as a smokescreen. They had already joined forces with Song Jiao's horse gang. That day in the steel forest behind Mount Qingliang, Su Fengnian did not refute Mi Chang, who pointed at his nose and scolded him. He only said that he did not do a good job. Perhaps he, the king of Bailiang, did not do a good job, but Su Fingnian must have done more than the outside world imagined. Su Fingnian took a sip of the huadiao tea that Qing Junyang had just warmed. His smiling face suddenly fell into silence. Chapter 1369. The 15-year-old huadiao wine had been one of the tributes of Gongnamdu since the first year of Yonghui. It was produced in the Great Feng dynasty and had a unique custom. When a rich family gave birth to a daughter, they would brew a few jars of wine every few days they were born. The wine jars would be painted with colors and buried under old osmanthus trees. When the daughter grew up and married, this wine would be used as a dowry. When the eldest princess of Bailiang was married to Jiangnan, the king of Bailiang, Su Shao, threatened to gather 1,000 jars of huadiao wine for his daughter's dowry. In a hurry, he only managed to gather 800 jars. Originally, this was not a shameful matter. At that time, people were butchering their daughters. Who dared to gossip? Who didn't know that no matter how fierce Su Shao was, Su Shao would only hear it? If the gossip of his two daughters reached his ears, as long as it wasn't thousands of miles away, even the emperor wouldn't be able to protect him. In the end, it was His Royal Highness, who was the first to stop his eldest sister from marrying, who personally led his personal guards and spent an entire day barging into almost all the houses of the rich and powerful in Liangzhou city. Only on the morning of His Royal Highness's wedding day did he finally bring back the last jar of top-quality huadiao wine with red eyes. Su Fingnian did not speak. Qing Junyang also did not make a sound. Zhang Xiuqing, who was no longer wearing a Taoist robe but casual clothes, gently pushed open the door and entered. He originally wanted to kneel down and pay his respects. Seeing that Qing Junyang was still in the room, he was momentarily in a dilemma. After Su Fingnian came back to his senses, he raised his wine cup and smiled. Old friends have met. Sit down and talk. Zhang Xiuqing's fear and trepidation were not faked. His mother, the person in front of him, was the northwest vassal king of Liang. The hand holding the wine cup was also holding an entire 300,000 cavalrymen at the border. This young man with the title of King of Bailiang and the title of Pillar of Bailiang was fighting to the death against the million-strong army of Beimang and the entire Beimang dynasty. Taking 10,000 steps back, the man who took the heads of the king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan, and the fifth raccoon of Mount Tibing, the guy who killed Wang Xianji, Zhang Xiuqing, a pretentious Taoist priest, didn't he meet a real immortal? Zhang Xiuqing glanced at Qing Junyang, who was still in the dark, and asked carefully with a perfect Jizhou accent, Wang. Young Master Su, are you all right? Su Fingnian nodded. It's fine. Zhang Xiuqing heaved a sigh of relief and sat upright. He said in a deep voice, this lowly one dares not to talk about official business. The first master asked me to do something for him first. When we meet in the future, he will make it up to me. After saying this, Zhang Xiuqing stood up, knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times. Su Fingnian did not stop him. Zhang Xiuqing, whose forehead was slightly red, sat down again. He quickly calmed himself down and continued, in the king, Zhang Xiuqing could not hold himself back from cursing. He slapped himself hard on the face and said, under the instruction of young Master Su, when General Yu was on the way to North Ji, they passed by South Foot Pass. The great leader had also led 3,000 soldiers to intercept them, and a fierce fight broke out. As expected, Yuan Tingshan, who only brought a few dozens of retinues with him, showed up after the fight, and the great leader let down his guard against him. On General Yu's journey to the north, he only drew his sword at Arnanlu Pass. The other dozen or so troops had shrunk into a complete mess. It's not that this little one is boasting, but the Northern Liang cavalry is indeed worthy of being called the #1 army in the world. Even though they were separated by River Province, the Jizhou army was still scared to death. Su Fingnian smiled and said, if the backbone of Jizhou, Yang Xinxing, was still here, it might not be like this. Maybe. Zhang Xiuqing only spoke a few words before he felt his throat dry up. He glanced at the wine cup on the table and did not dare to take it. Su Fengnian poured a cup for him. Only then did he lower his head and bend over to take it. He tilted his head slightly and drank it in one gulp. Qing Xunyang was dumbfounded. What kind of show was this? What general you? What Beiliang cavalry? She had heard of Yang Xinxing before. He was the old man who acted like a tyrant in Jizhou but immediately became unaccustomed to other places. It was said that he suffered a great defeat at a place called Guangling Road in Liang. He was a classic example of a man who could not keep his integrity in his old age. She was more familiar with Yuan Tingshan. It could not be helped. Everyone in Jizhou knew about Master Yuan. He was a legendary figure who had both praise and blame. Those who approved of him worshipped him to the point of prostrating themselves before him, praising him to the skies. Those who did not approve of him gritted their teeth and scolded him for being a mad dog who had once been beaten by the king of Beiliang. He did not rely on riding a horse to kill enemies, but relied on riding a woman to achieve his current status. Zhang Xiuqing was about to speak when someone knocked on the door. Zhang Xiuqing stood up like a bird startled by the twang of a bow, startling Qing Xunyang. Su Fengnian put down his hand and signaled for Zhang Xiuqing to calm down. He said calmly, "Come in." After Mi Fingjia entered the room, the old man glanced at Fan Shaochai with extreme annoyance and said softly, "That one guy came to find us." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Should I say that this guy is haunting us or is he infatuated?" It turned out that after the four of them had entered the border of Ji province, they had inadvertently encountered a group of 40 men who were escorting a descendant of an aristocratic family. The arrangement of the group was not inferior to that of Ji province's elite cavalry. That fellow had only glanced at Fan Shaochai, who was riding past him, and his soul had followed Fan Shaochai's horse. He didn't care about anything else and immediately turned his horse around, desperately trying to catch up with Su Fengnian's group. As it turned out, when the young man named Ruan Gang was young, he met Fan Shaochai in Dijon City. At that time, he was shocked. After Fan Shaochai left, this infatuated man used the excuse of traveling to study and had not taken a wife for many years. In the end, he felt that their reunion was God's will. Fan Shaochai said that she did not know this Ruan Gang and had never stopped in Dijon City. At that time, Ruan Gang looked at Su Fengnian with hidden bitterness and thought that Fan Shaochai had married and become someone else's wife. What was interesting was that Ruan Gang did not try to bully others. He only begged Su Fengnian to help him and Fan Shaochai reconcile. In the end, this son of the deputy general of Jizhou even got off his horse and knelt on the road with tears and snot all over his face. Fortunately, he did not see Fan Shaochai's ferocious expression on the horse's back. At that time, the third great master of the Fu Shui chamber really wanted to cut him into pieces. Fan Shaochai looked at Su Fengnian and said expressionlessly, "I will find a chance to kill him. Don't worry, it will be done without anyone knowing." Su Fengnian shook his head and smiled. "You women can have a man who cares about you so much. Even if you are not together, you can't hurt him too much. After all, there are not many good men like him in this world." Fan Shaochai still kept a straight face and asked, "Why don't I put him in the side room of the Fu Shui chamber? He is the son of the deputy general of Jizhou after all. He can be useful." Su Fengnian asked, "You don't like him? Besides, you are one of the top 10 figures in the Fu Shui chamber. Why do you care about this little bit of merit?" Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. "I don't care what the women of the Fu Shui chamber do when I can't see them. But you are standing right in front of me. Forget it." Fan Shaochai made an "oh" sound and did not say anything else. Su Fengnian said to Mi Fingjia, "Just tell Ruan Gang that I will be visiting him tomorrow. Tell him to prepare good wine and good food." let him continue to wait. Having a thought in his heart, even if it is for the rest of his life, is probably better than having a dead heart. No one in the room said anything. Zhang Xiuqing did not dare, Mi Fingjie did not care, and Fan Shaochai closed her eyes to rest. Only Qing Junyang said softly, "It is like this." Su Fengnian suddenly thought of one of the Beiliang's chess pieces, the guest of the prince's mansion, Shu Xiu, who wore the godly face. Su Fengnian's intuition told him that this chess piece had not only taken root beside the prince of Xiangfan city in Qing province, but also changed its color. His master, Li Shan, had always regarded Go as a small Dao. Most importantly, he believed that Go was divided into black and white, and it would always be black and white. But the human heart was the most changeable. How could it be divided into black and white? Even if they were thousands of li away from the Beiliang, even if the Beiliang cavalry could not take care of themselves, to kill Shu Xiu, who could not see the light of day on the Qing province stage, in one night, Fu Shui chamber could still pay a price. But this was meaningless. The owner of the godly face, who had gone to Beimang's hidden chess piece, had finally begun to make waves. As for Chen Xiaobao, Chen Wang, who lived high up in Taiyan City, and Wang Lufting, who was a close friend of Lingzhou's golden thread weaving company, Sun Yin. Su Fengnian did not treat them as chess pieces that had to listen to Beiliang's orders. He just wanted to let nature take its course. Su Fengnian was more looking forward to Chao Wei. Under the cover of Yuan Dao and nearly 10,000 Beiliang cavalry, Chao Wei's more elite cavalry might really be able to become a surprise force that could make the final decision. Of course, this was on the premise that Beiliang's third front could grit its teeth and resist the invasion of Beimang's cavalry to the south. Su Fengnian picked up his wine cup and walked to the window. He looked at the endless stream of people on the busy street and drank a mouthful of huadia wine. Your peace order is in Beimang's imperial palace. Using hundreds of large satin pieces to piece together the picturesque mountains and rivers of two dynasties, you want to buy peace for that old woman with black and white. This technical work should be rewarded. But this reward is my Beiliang's 300,000 cavalry. It depends on whether or not your Beimang can eat it. Be careful not to burn your intestines. Chapter 1370. There's one more chapter before 12 o'clock. The four horsemen who did not stir up any trouble were like a drop of water thrown into a ravine. They could not stir up anything. After Su Fengnian and Zhang Xiuqing finished their discussion, they quickly left the restaurant. Qing Junyang only said one sentence when she saw them off. She said that the last time they parted, he gave her a sentence, and this time she returned it to him. Su Fengnian smiled and accepted it. Zhang Xiuqing returned to the window of the private room and watched the four horsemen leave on the street. He did not turn around. The woman was slowly tidying up the wine jug and wine cups on the table, as well as the exquisite plates with side dishes. Zhang Xiuqing asked curiously, Qing Junyang, what was that sentence? Can you say it? Qing Junyang smiled gracefully, why can't I say it? Last time he told me to live well. There's no greater reason than this in the world. Zhang Xiuqing sighed, the world is going to be chaotic. Qing Junyang asked softly, who is he? If you can't say it, don't say it. Zhang Xiuqing turned around and was a little confused, I really can't say it. But I talked to him for so long. Qing Junyang, can't you guess? Qing Junyang's cheeks were slightly red, I don't know what I was thinking at that time. Anyway, I feel like I can't remember anything now. Zhang Xiuqing was stunned for a moment and held back his laughter, just think of him as Su Lang. Anyway, his real identity will be revealed one day. When that time comes, even if you escape back to Beimang and close your ears, it will be useless. From the details of how he treated the servant girl, I can see that he is not a good person, but he can't be bad. Qing Junyang rolled her eyes at this Taoist priest who always liked to laugh at himself and only knew how to subdue demons in old books. She said softly, He is bad. Zhang Shiqing did not know the inside story and was not willing to get involved in this matter, so as to avoid being in a difficult position. Oh right, after the Shenzhou continent sank in the eyes of scholars of the spring and autumn period, some scholar who did not accumulate virtue with his mouth said a derogatory sentence that spread far and wide. It said, Su Shao is not a person when he looks at himself in the mirror. After Zhang Shiqing settled down in Jizhou, he did not understand at first. Later, he found out that they were scolding the old Prince Liang for killing too many people, and that he was a malicious spirit who had intruded into the world of the living. As for others, such as, when the great general walks, one is high while the other is low, this was simple and clear. It was insinuating that Su Shao was a cripple, and, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. This was once used to mock the hunchback butcher and his eldest son, Su Fengnian, for being hedonistic and unscrupulous. However, with the rise of Su Fengnian's reputation, very few people brought it up. Zhang Shiqing sighed. It was a pity that he would not be able to take a look at the great general who had achieved great merits and had met a good end. Putting away these useless thoughts, Zhang Shiqing looked at the sky outside the window. It was time for him to leave the city. The first master was still waiting for him with his own news. Zhang Shiqing suddenly returned to his seat and asked Qing Junyang to put back the cup, chopsticks, and dishes. He poured himself a cup of wine and drank slowly. She leaned against the window and quietly watched the bustling streets of the foreign city. After Su Fengnian's group of 4 passed through the Wild Goose Stop Pass north of Dazhan City, they abandoned their horses and traveled on foot to avoid any unexpected problems. They quickly traveled north on the mountain roads where woodcutters and hunters rarely went. Both Mi Fingjie and Fan Shaochai had a whole new level of respect for the child. It was not strange for him to have such a high level of comprehension at such a young age, but it was completely inexplicable that his internal energy was so strong. Of course, they would never have guessed that the shepherd boy, Yulong, had inherited half of Wang Xianji's legacy. During the trip to Jizhou, the 6th-year Feng Zone was able to accurately find Su Fengnian and pass on the situation of the battle in Yuzhou. When the group of 4 was running along a high ridge along a canyon, Su Fengnian suddenly stopped again. He raised his arm to support the handsome sea eagle that was falling through the clouds. Mi Fingjie saw that the usually calm king of Beiliang was somewhat dignified this time. He stood at the edge of the cliff in a daze. Yulong sat on the ground and took off his sturdy leather boots. He lifted them upside down and threw away the gravel that was sticking to his feet. Mi Fingjie could not help but ask, "Is the battle at the Calabash Gate not going well?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "In the first battle at Zayoma village, the losses on both sides were actually within the expectations of Chu Lushan and Yan Wenluan. However, based on the intelligence reports I've received so far, there are some accidents outside of the battlefield that we must pay attention to." Yang Yuanzhan personally led the vanguard to attack Crouching Bao City. Since ancient times, the nomads of the north have lived half their lives on horseback. Naturally, they are skilled in horseback archery. However, during the early days of the Great Feng dynasty, they still maintained an absolute advantage over the grassland forces. You might not expect this, but even at the end of the Great Feng dynasty, even if they did not rely on the sturdy city walls and elite crossbows, the Great Feng army was still able to fight to a draw against the grassland cavalry. The reversal of victory and defeat between the two sides happened in the last 200 years or so. Countless border trade with smuggled goods for huge profits, in addition to the countless raids down south in the last 200 years, allowed the northern grassland to have a considerable number of craftsmen and ironware. The scholars of the spring and autumn period, Hongjia, rushed north and brought Beimang a rich population, a profound culture of the Central Plains, and a subtle influence on the concept of war. Dongzhua's private army attaches importance to infantry, siege, and auxiliary soldiers. This is one of the obvious changes. Su Fengnian squatted down and picked up a handful of yellow dirt. Gently holding it in his hand, he said, "Beimang claims to have invested 300,000 soldiers on the Eastern Front. If we were to go back 30 or 40 years, when we were in the early days of the 9 kingdoms of the Central Plains, we would definitely take it for granted that the 300,000 soldiers were, at most, 100,000 soldiers. Even if we added in the laborers who transported the provisions and the auxiliary soldiers who were responsible for the maintenance of the equipment, it would still not reach 300,000. Su Xiao might not be the first person to resist this kind of bad habit of bolstering one's courage before the battle, but Su Xiao was definitely the military general who resisted it the most resolutely and thoroughly. Ever since he attacked the various Liang bandit towns to set up separatist forces, he said that he had 5,000 troops and horses. Later on, he even became a huge joke. When the Northern Han battle had just begun, the Northern Han frontline general heard a spy report that Su Xiao had brought 20,000 soldiers with him. The general defending the city counted on his fingers. According to the old rules, there were only 6,000 to 7,000 soldiers, at most 10,000. There was still a battle to be fought and there was no need to retreat. In the end, the Northern Han general was captured by Su Xiao. Before being beheaded as a sacrifice, he cursed Su Xiao as a swindler. Su Xiao was so angry that he kicked out half of the general's teeth. He retorted, "If this daddy says 20,000, it means 20,000. I don't cheat the old or the young. You have the face to call such an honest person a swindler." Originally, Yudilong had been swinging his 2 boots back and forth, as if he wanted to take a stroll in the boots. Hearing this, he quieted down and perked up his ears to listen to his master talk about something that was very far away from him, war. Chapter 1371. Su Fengnian clenched his fists, feeling the coolness of the yellow soil in his palms. He sighed, putting aside Beimang's central line and Liuzhou's western line. The eastern line of Yuzhou has more than 200,000 fighters. The remaining 100,000 auxiliary soldiers are actually no different from fighters. Beimang rides more and walks less. Dong Zhuo has set a rule that during this campaign, the fighters are not allowed to set up tents along the way. When they dismount, they sleep. When they open their eyes, they get on their horses and fight. The reason why there are 100,000 auxiliary soldiers is more to deal with the strongholds at the mouth of the gourd. When Yang Yuanzhan dealt with the Zaoma stronghold, he assigned the auxiliary soldiers to attack the strongholds. Most of the commanders of these auxiliary soldiers have fathers who were Chuanqiu survivors, or were actually Chuanqiu survivors in their 40s or 50s. As for Yang Yuanzhan's personal army and Hong Jingyan's Ruan cavalry, these main forces bypassed the strongholds and rode straight down, striving to reach Crouching Bao City as quickly as possible. By the time the main forces reach the city and the siege weapons arrive, the rear lines will have been more or less cleared. The conscripted peasants in Longyao province who are responsible for the supply of food will be able to continue their journey south. Therefore, in this battle, Beimang and Dong Zhuo are fighting very central plains. Fan Shaochai said coldly, "In that case, the strongholds north of Crouching Bao City are clearly doomed. Why didn't Yuzhou just line up Crouching Bao City, Wuanhe City, and Shuguang City at the northernmost part of the mouth of the gourd? Wouldn't that stop Beimang's army outside the pass? They wouldn't have to worry about Beimang's cavalry slowly encroaching on the strongholds. In the end, you Beiliang don't care about the lives of your soldiers just because you want to be the best in the world." Mi Fingjie looked at this woman as if she was an idiot. For the first time, a smile appeared on his withered face. Of course, this smile had nothing to do with good intentions. This was not to say that Mi Fingjie had grasped the loophole in Fan Shaochai's words. The master of the profound sword cave's thinking was extremely simple. He was a Beiliang general who had soaked in blood on the battlefield and laid in piles of corpses. How could a veteran like Yan Wenluan, who had proven his talent in war during the Spring and Autumn War, be a fool fishing for fame? Su Fengnian did not ridicule Fan Shaochai for being a frog at the bottom of a well, nor did he mock her for being a frog at the bottom of a well. Instead, He raised his clenched fist and pointed at the canyon by his feet. He calmly said, "The mouth of the gourd is not here. I have personally traveled beyond the Great Wall, so I can roughly imagine how big the mouth of the gourd is. Moreover, in terms of military affairs, where to build a city on a mountain, where to build a pass, where to build a fort near a river, and where to build a flintlock based on a dangerous situation, not only were there particular considerations, there were also all kinds of complicated adaptations. The mouth of the gourd is the most advantageous terrain in Beiliang, and it is also the only natural defensive strategic location. You were right when you said that you wanted the soldiers of the fort to die. Once the enemy arrived, these officers and soldiers who were defending the fort would not be able to survive. They would only be able to defend to the death." Su Fengnian clenched his fists. The wind and sand on the cliff blew against his face, messing up the hair on his temples. He said, "Beiliang only told Li Yang that the mouth of the gourd could hold 150 to 60,000 northern barbarians, but most of the people of the Central Plains were unwilling to believe it. If from the beginning, Yan Wenluan wanted the 50,000 Yuzhou soldiers in the 3 cities and 200 forts at the mouth of the gourd to all die in battle at the mouth of the gourd." Su Fengnian, whose tone had always been calm, paused for a moment and then smiled. "I'm afraid that even if the Central Plains heard about this, they would pretend not to have heard it. Perhaps they would just say, 'Oh,' and then say nothing else. One should drink wine, one should admire the snow, one should enjoy the snow, one should enjoy the pleasures of life." Fan Shaochai bit her lip, stubbornly asking, "If one person is willing to fight to the death, 100 people are willing. Even if 1,000 people are willing, are the 50,000 soldiers of the Yuzhou border army really willing to die at the mouth of the gourd? Father and mother gave them 2 legs. Won't they flee?" Finally, Mi Fingjie could confidently teach this woman, who knew nothing but killing, a lesson. With a sneer, he said, "You are the descendant of one of the first nobles of the old northern Han. How could you possibly understand what the people of northern Liang are thinking? The great general has only been in charge of Beiliang for 20 years. The morale of the army is still there. Moreover, the Beiliang border has not been peaceful for many years. When soldiers go to war, go into battle, and kill the enemy, Beiliang is the best in the world. It is not just because of the Beiliang's horses, bows, crossbows, and cold sabers. In the end, it is because of their pride. Do you, Fan Shaochai, understand?" Su Fengnian declined to comment. With a slight bitterness, he softly said, "Beiliang has always claimed to have 300,000 cavalry. The busybodies of Liyang have always been curious as to how much resources Su Shao has saved up for me. How many cavalry and infantry are there? How many border armies and local garrisons are there?" Yudilong quietly asked, "Master, how many do you have?" Su Fengnian appeared absent-minded. After turning his head, he gently smiled and said, "Guess?" Yudilong shook his head. Su Fengnian once again gazed at the northwestern sky. Once upon a time, there was an old man who liked to say, "Guess." In response, Su Fengnian would always roll his eyes and say, "Step on your grandpa." The old man would smile and say, "That's right, I'm your father." Su Fengnian put away these thoughts and said in a low voice, "The Yuzhou garrisons at Calabash Pass are willing to defend to the death because of the reason Mi Fingjie mentioned. However, you did not mention the more important reason. Beiliang has less than 2 million households and is limited by its small territory. No matter how much they recuperate, their population will always be less than 10 million. Then let me ask you a simple question. There are only 2 million households, but Beiliang has hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Which household doesn't have someone in the army? If the Beiliang border army is destroyed, which household doesn't need to wear mourning clothes?" Su Fengnian gnashed his teeth. Almost all the young adults of Yuzhou province are in the local army of Yuzhou province. Their hometowns are right behind the garrisons of the 3 cities and 200 fortresses at the mouth of Calabash. If one of them dies, their families may live for another day. It's that simple. Su Fengnian slowly stood up and said, Yan Wenwan, who is in charge of Yozhou's military affairs, set up an unwritten rule. When Su Xiao was still alive, countless Yuzhou officials wantonly criticized this rule. After I inherited it, all the scholars, including Huang Shang, strongly requested that this rule be abolished. Mi Fingjie did not know about this, but Fan Xiaochai, who had become the spy of the Fu Shui chamber, knew very well. The Yuzhou border army has an iron law. No matter who it is, if someone retreats before the battle, their entire family will be executed. Yan Wenluan once told me that he could give up being the commander of Beiliang's infantry and could even hand over the military power at Yozhou's border to someone else. However, before he dies in battle, no one can change this rule. Even I, Su Fengnian, cannot change it. Su Fengnian exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. He squinted his eyes and murmured softly, "This is war, this is Beiliang." The mountain wind was swift and fierce. Su Fengnian stood at the edge of the cliff. He was a little far from the three people, and seemed a little lonely. Fan Xiaochai hesitated for a moment before asking, "What are we going to do next?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Whatever I can do, I'll do. I've been doing the same thing since I came to Jizhou." Mi Fingjie, who had noticed some clues before, asked carefully, "Are you trying to return to the peak of martial arts?" Su Fengnian replied, "The mountain is at the end of the river and the mountain is at the end of the river. Even if there is no road under my feet, I have to find one." Outside Dunhuang, there was a huge stone Buddha with a majestic mountain as its embryo. Day after day, year after year, the Buddha looked at the world with a smile and pity. In the main hall of Mount Wudong, there was the Xinwu Great Emperor, who had stood with his sword for hundreds of years. In the Holy Temple, the Absolute Saint, the Quasi-Saint, and the many sages who accompanied the sacrifice still had the aura of death. He murmured softly, "Zizai, zizai, 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 there is no one, there is no self. Ask yourself where you are, and you will naturally be at ease. Tathagata Buddha, Tathagata Buddha, there is a future, there is a future. How did this life come to be?" Taoism sat in forgetfulness to comprehend immortality. Buddhism visualized to let go. Confucianism guarded benevolence and great fortitude. Su Fengnian closed his eyes and stretched out his hand, allowing the wind to blow away the handful of yellow sand in his palm. When Su Fengnian finally arrived at Transverse Water City, a middle-aged man dressed in a simple and clean Confucian robe came out of the city alone to welcome him. He said a few words and gave him a gift. When Su Fengnian urged his horse to leave, the sixth-year banknote scholar of Yonghui Academy bid him farewell. "When I left Jiangnan in Yonghui Academy's seventh-year banknote, I brought with me a bag of soil from my hometown. 14 years later, the soil has long since disappeared, leaving only this old bag. I sincerely ask that after I die, when the hooves of Beiliang can one day step on the hinterland of Beimang, please take a handful of soil from Beimang and offer it as a sacrifice to Wei Jingtang." Chapter 1372. In the north of Jetlu Commandery in Yuzhou, after hundreds or thousands of years of erosion by flowing water, the ground was fragmented and crisscrossed with gullies of different sizes. A dark-skinned young swordsman with a short stature was standing on a flat-roofed gully with a broad view. He was using his arm to wipe the long sword that had never been sheathed since it came out of the furnace. The name of the sword was Sheathless. Beimang had a good saber and a nameless sword, and Beimang had no swordsman in Jianghu. These were all recognized by Beimang Liyang. Although Jianghu Liyang was one of the few grandmasters of swordsmanship in the world and the calm disturbance was a famous weapon on the list of swordsmanship, Liyang Jianghu still thought that Beimang had no swordsmanship and even said that Beimang would still have no swordsmanship in another 100 years. He was much more indifferent to this kind of thing than Jianghu Liyang, whose name was specially changed to imply that Beimang's swordsmanship was the combination of green and yellow. For him, practicing his own sword was more important than anything else. Besides, practicing swordsmanship was just practicing swordsmanship. As for the title of Earth Immortal or the number one in the world, he didn't need to think too much about it. Therefore, he never wasted his energy to think about things other than swordsmanship. The sheathless sword in his hand was a new sword. It had no history or inheritance. The materials used to forge it and the craftsmanship of the swordsmith were not too bad. However, compared to those famous swords with interesting names on the list, it was definitely a far cry. There was a difference of at least 8,000 miles between them. However, the man who led him on the path of swordsmanship, who was unwilling to admit that he was his master, helped him pay for the casting of the sword before he left and said a lot of long-winded last words to him. He was like a dying man who just couldn't swallow his last breath and stayed up for a few days and nights. No matter how filial the younger generation was, he wouldn't be able to stand it. A sword is fine as long as it fits the hand. Once it fits the hand, it will be satisfactory. A swordsman who changes his sword back and forth will not be able to practice good swordsmanship. Of course, you might ask if a broken sword can't be replaced. Wrong, you don't believe me. You see, Liang Li Chungang only has a wooden horse ox. He can even open the gate of heaven with a sword. Is it wrong to learn from him? That can't be right. Although I don't practice swordsmanship, I feel that when a swordsman chooses a sword, it's like a man looking for a wife. Love at first sight is the most important thing. Hurry up and take a few more glances at the sword in your hand. I spent a few dozen taels of silver on it. You poor brat, do you dare to not fall in love at first sight? If you have the ability, try shaking your head and see if I don't break your arms and legs. If you don't even have this bit of eyesight, how can you still practice the sword? I've wasted a few dozen taels of silver. From your expression, it seems that you don't want me to leave. Ha! Are you nodding or shaking your head? Damn it, if you don't want me to leave, can't you at least bring some money with you? A few copper coins will do. Oh, so you want to ask me for a few sword manuals, but you're too embarrassed to ask. To tell you the truth, no. Brat, I'll leave you with one last sentence. Remember, don't think that just because I didn't take your money, you can ignore it. Practicing martial arts, whether it's practicing the sword or practicing the sword, these two words can break all logic. Ridiculous. You don't understand, do you? These two words are enough for you to ponder over for 10 years. Who told you to have such poor comprehension? It's worse than when I was young. Otherwise, I would have taken you in as my disciple long ago. Since your comprehension is poor, don't blame me for being stingy. If you want to blame someone, blame your parents. That's all I have to say. Since I can't find a wife in Beimang, then I'll find one in Liyang. Let's not meet again in the future. I'm afraid that when the time comes, my heart will ache for the sword money and I'll regret helping you pay the bill today. At that time, the swordsmith beside him was so angry that his face turned ashen. Let's not talk about the little pauper, but this big pauper is really your mother. It's fine if you say that 11 taels of silver is a few dozen taels, but you want to round it up and only pay 10 taels. This kind of person, you're bragging so much in my sword shop, and you're even misleading people and teaching them ridiculous. You're the most ridiculous person in the world. Then, the bad-tempered swordsmith finally couldn't take it anymore and scolded him on the spot. It'd be strange if you could find a wife in Beimang. Hurry up and go to Liyang to harm other girls. Then you'll be thanking the heavens and earth. The young swordsman stopped wiping his sword and looked into the distance with a slight smile on his face. If that unknown swordsmith back then knew of that guy's identity, he probably wouldn't have dared to scold him like that even if he was beaten to death. Now, after Tuoba Bodhisattva became the number one in Beimang, he was still thought to be no match for Wang Xianji. No matter how much Tuoba Bodhisattva's cultivation improved over the years, he couldn't change this fact. However, the previous number 1 in Beimang before Tuoba Bodhisattva mysteriously disappeared. Everyone in Beimang believed that he could definitely fight Wang Xianji to the death. This genius who was hailed as the one in 1,000 years in the grasslands was Huyan Dogwan. He was a sect by himself. And this swordsman who couldn't become Huyan Dogwan's disciple was Tai Mu Dai. His ancestors were once the highest flying eagles in the grasslands. They even soared freely in the skies of the central plains. Tai Mu Dai wasn't someone who would reminisce about the past. He had a feeling that he most likely wouldn't be able to return to the grasslands this time. He didn't feel much about the dynasty of Beimang. Most people in the grasslands were like that. A tent was a home, and a surname was a tribe. The reason why he got involved in this mess was because the Beimang royal court used his tribe to threaten him. At that time, the 10 of them joined forces to kill that Beiliang general with the surname Yen. Tai Chi and Ko Ku died first. Tibing Shan was abandoned by that little idea and died at a certain pass. Later, the 7 of them fell into a deadlock again. Ah Hema, who always complained about not being able to drink, died laughing. Later, they almost succeeded in escaping danger under the lead of the Great Yu House. Unfortunately, they were discovered by a group of people who were said to be Qi cultivators. 2 of the Beimang experts who had been famous for a long time died. Tai Mu Dai didn't even know their names. He only remembered that they both used sabers. One of them even helped him block a spear from the Beiliang expert. Now, only he, Tai Mu Dai, the Great Yu House teacher, the princess who always covered half of her face, and the gloomy old woman who had lost the flowers on her temples. This should have been a great situation of a group of people ganging up on one person. Why did they lose so badly? The Great Yu House teacher said many things while escaping, but Tai Mu Dai forgot all about it. He only knew that they tried countless methods. At first, they scattered in all directions. Later, they tried their best to surround and attack. Later, they tried all kinds of ambushes and interceptions. In the end, it was all useless. From beginning to end, the Beiliang man, who was so strong that even Tai Mu Dai felt fear, used one method to hunt them down. Whoever stood in the northernmost position, he would target and kill them. He didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. He only used one spear. Before that, his opponent could use all their strength. If someone stood in the northernmost position, he wouldn't hesitate to change his target. Generally speaking, martial arts masters who had reached the level of these 10 people had extremely strong stamina and legs. If they were determined to escape, it wouldn't be easy for them to kill an enemy of the same level, even if they were more skilled. They would need to fight for a long time. But the problem was that the guy who only used an ordinary spear only needed one spear to kill. This was more fatal than anything else. Before he used his spear, he would rely on his strong body to wear them down. He would either dodge or meet force with force when he couldn't dodge in time. It was precisely because he had personally experienced how terrifying this person was that Tai Mu Dai understood why he often heard people say that there were only 2 kinds of experts in the world. One was Wang Xianji, and the other was all the martial artists led by Tuoba Bodhisattva. Tai Mu Dai grinned. That man who said he was going to Liang to find a wife. In the current world, he, Tuoba Bodhisattva, and the king of Beiliang could be considered one kind of martial artists. Everyone else, including Tai Mu Dai, was another kind. A middle-aged man whose clothes were stained with blood squatted by the young swordsman's feet. He grabbed a handful of soil and put it in his mouth. He slowly chewed and smiled. What happy things are you thinking about? Out of us 4 stray dogs, only you can smile, and it's so easy. Tai Mu Dai smiled. I'm thinking about a man. The scholarly man who was eating soil joked. Tai Mu Dai, your words have a deep meaning. I really didn't see it before. Tai Mu Dai, chuckled. The man who had fallen into disrepair also seemed to be in a leisurely mood. He said sarcastically, "In spring, the earth's energy flows, and the earth awakens. The yellow cotton soil in my mouth belongs to the children of the earth. They're still young. The one I tasted a few days ago is already old." Although he wasn't interested, Tai Mu Dai still listened attentively. The man looked around and smiled warmly. He whispered mysteriously, "Since you're standing here, then you have a chance to live. It'll be difficult for the three of us." An old woman with a hunched back said eccentrically, "Great music house, you're not in a bad mood either. You can even chat with Tai Mu Dai here. That little idea of ours is risking his life to buy us some precious time to breathe." It was the chess and sword music school's Mr. First. The man laughed. "An inch of time is worth an inch of gold. Time is something that's always valuable. Of course, it's even more valuable now. The heads of the four of us added together should barely be worth 10,000 cavalrymen. Roughly speaking, 10,000 cavalry with 10 years of life on the battlefield, that's..." He suddenly stood up and said with a serious expression, "It's here." Tai Mu Dai tightened his grip on his scabbard and said in a deep voice, "My sword will definitely be faster than the previous pass." The old woman sneered. "So what if you have the elegance of a sword immortal? As long as we can't kill Su Yanbing, we'll have to pay with our lives again today." Great Music House patted the young swordsman's shoulder. "Your sword is getting faster and faster. Even if it's just a hair's breadth faster, it's still a good thing. Tai Mu Dai, you must trust yourself and your sword." The young man nodded. His tanned face was dazzling under the sun. Chapter 1373. This lightened Happy House's mood. He looked at the old woman, who was the oldest and most afraid of death, and said indifferently, "I'll stay behind this time." Not only did the old woman not appreciate his kindness, but she also said sarcastically, "It's your chess and sword music school's turn." Happy House smiled and dismissed it. About half a mile away, two silhouettes crossed each other and, slowly, walked towards Tai Mu Dai's huge boat. The old woman narrowed her eyes and looked over, her face as calm as water. Happy House didn't look at the fight. He shook his sleeves and sat cross-legged. The woman in the white dress was like a white butterfly dancing gracefully on the yellow sand slope, ethereal and agile. This little thought, nicknamed half-face makeup, was fighting in close quarters with the guy surnamed Su. With a tap of her foot, she spun around and grabbed Su Yanbing's head with her 5 fingers like hooks. Su Yanbing's body leaned back, and the slender jade-like hand brushed past a few inches above his face. The end of the iron spear in his hand casually hooked and slammed into Little Thought's neck. Even the 8 of them, including Banmi and Zhuang, had experienced this kind of casual spear attack countless times. Because it did not contain a lot of qi, even if they were hit, they would not be seriously injured. However, at Phoenix Rising Pass, Wei Yila was angered because of this. After being hit 8 times, the ruthless Peak Master Ti Bing was so angry that his lungs were about to explode from anger. He no longer prepared to escape at any time and instead used the most powerful punch he had ever used in his life. He did not hold back and looked death in the face. In the end, Su Yanbing seized the opportunity and pierced through Wei Yila's fist, arm, and shoulder. Little Thought tilted her body and quickly rushed forward, dodging the iron spear. If someone were to watch the fight from the side, it would look like she was carrying the spear on her shoulder. Little Thought instantly arrived in front of Su Yanbing, who had just stood up. Her 4 fingers formed a sharp knife and ruthlessly stabbed towards Su Yanbing's heart. Su Yanbing's wrist shook slightly, and the shaft of the spear lightly knocked against her shoulder, pushing her away. The white-clothed woman's feet slid on the yellow sand, leaving behind a trail of blood at the corner of her mouth. Su Yanbing held the iron spear in his hand, his face expressionless. He did not pay any attention to Little Thought, whose eyes were as sharp as knives. Instead, he looked at the big turtle that was separated by 2 deep trenches. After acting for so long, it was time for him to take the stage. Sure enough, Little Thought leaped and fell into the ravine. Before Little Thought jumped off the cliff, he sat on the ground like a private teacher who was about to teach a lesson. He smiled gently and said, "Heaven and earth have no words, the wind sings." There was a lot of sand in the desert, but if there were only strong winds blowing in the sky without a single speck of yellow sand, it would be illogical. On the plateau where Su Yanbing was standing, he could only hear the whistling of the wind, but there was no sand at all. Lu Fu sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to concentrate. In an instant, blood flowed out from his 7 orifices, but his face remained serene. He said in a clear voice, "War in the south of the city, death in the north of the country. For my sake, I call the crow, and for the guest hero." At the end of his speech, a figure rose slowly. Another Lu Fu stood up, like thousands of rays of light converging to form a shape. He took a step forward, directly passing through his sitting self. His sleeves fluttered, and his steps became bigger and bigger. He approached the edge of the big turtle and turned into a long rainbow, rushing towards Su Yanbing. The sitting Mr. First's face was covered in blood, and the green robe on his knees dripped with blood. He said in a hoarse voice, "Life is short, plants and trees are short, and all will return to the earth in peace." Another Lu Fu stood up, but his figure was not as elegant as the previous one. He staggered, but his speed was extremely fast. He also rushed towards Su Yanbing. Sword immortals flew on their swords, traveling north in the morning and crossing the horizon in the evening. However, the immortals' astral travel was even faster. The 2 Lu Fu's astral travel came one after another. The former stopped behind Su Yanbing, while the latter came in front of Su Yanbing. At some point in time, Tai Mu Dai was standing in front of the dead master of the great music house. He roared, "Defy!" The Lu Fu's corpse, Tai Mu Dai, one Lu Fu's soul, and Su Yanbing, the other Lu Fu's soul. The 5 of them happened to be in a straight line. The old woman in the spider web cocoon did not see how Tai Mu Dai attacked, nor did she see when he left the Big Turtle Valley and headed toward the Big Turtle Valley. When she could finally take a closer look, she realized that the situation she saw was so bizarre that she could not believe her eyes. The Lu Fu's cultivator sacrificed his life to guide Tai Mu Dai, to use the Earth Immortal's killing move. It ended with Su Yanbing's spear piercing Tai Mu Dai's shoulder 4 feet in front of him. The tip of the sheathless sword was still a foot away from Su Yanbing's heart. Although the sword chi had arrived and caused a pool of blood to appear on Su Yanbing's chest, it was definitely not enough to kill him. In a battle of life and death between top martial arts grandmasters, a foot of distance was like the difference between yin and yang. However, between Su Yanbing and Tai Mu Dai, there was someone holding the spear. This prevented Su Yanbing from casually pulling the spear downwards and crushing Tai Mu Dai's heart and lungs. Su Yanbing pulled out the spear. The body of the spear let out a series of ear-piercing screeches. The uninvited guest supported Tai Mu Dai, with one hand and flicked his wrist with the other. There were traces of blood on his palm. The old woman swallowed. Chapter 1374. As a senior on the level of Spiderweb's ancestor, she recognized this person. Huyen Dagwan. Other than Tuoba Bodhisattva, there was no one else who could make Su Yanbing's spear return at full power. Of course, it was even more unrealistic for the latter to return empty-handed. Huyen Dagwan laughed. "You've finally made it in time. Su Yanbing, if you don't kill Tai Mu Dai, I won't make trouble for Su Fingyan. How about it?" Su Yanbing's expression was cold. He raised his spear an inch and took a step back. The opponent in front of him was worthy of him pulling away to the most suitable position for his spear to unleash its full power. Huyan Dogwan said helplessly, to tell the truth, Liang Mang's fight has nothing to do with me. I've never thought of making things difficult for Su Fingnian. Taimu Dai struggled for a moment, but Huyan Dogwan's hand on his shoulder slightly increased in strength. The former immediately found it difficult to breathe. Huyan Dogwan straightened his expression and said, but if you insist on killing Taimu Dai, today, then I don't mind killing Su Fingnian. As for whether or not it succeeds, I don't care. The old woman knew that Huyan Dogwan wasn't purposely releasing his qi, but she still felt suffocated. Then, she immediately felt a surge of grief and indignation that she couldn't suppress no matter how hard she tried. This was because the person who had chased them for an entire 10 days without saying a single word had finally spoken. Su Yanbing said calmly, "You'll have to ask my spear first." Huyan Dogwan, who was even more fluent in the official language of Liyang than the people of Liyang, cursed. He laughed bitterly and said, Stop, I'm scared of you. Su Yanbing, since you're determined to fight, fine. The spear in your hand can't take a single blow. Go back and get a new spear. For better or worse, it can take 3 spears from you. Otherwise, we won't be able to fight to our heart's content. I, Huyan Dogwan, will wait for you here. Taimu Dai, that whatever, and that old woman who likes to stick a red flower in her mouth, I'll help you keep them here. When the time comes, whoever wins will speak. How about it? Su Yanbing nodded, turned around, and left just like that. This scene caused the old woman's eyes to almost pop out of their sockets. When Su Yanbing's figure disappeared from sight, Huyan Dogwan released his grip. Taimu Dui, whose face was covered in tears, turned to look at the large banner where Mr. Yu sat. The scabbard slipped out of his hand. Huyan Dogwan calmly said, "Pick it up." Taimu Dui, seemed to be out of his wits and did not hear what Huyan Dogwan was saying. Huyan Dogwan was too lazy to waste any more words. He slapped Taimu several zhang away from the Great Joy House's corpse. Then, he kicked the abandoned sword over. Little thought, half of her face covered by a white veil, came to Huyan Dogwan with a complicated expression. Huyan Dogwan sighed, 800 years ago, was it important who we were? It was not strange that Luo Yang could not let go. She was Qin Empress's. She had even let go of this so-called Emperor Qin's shadow, so what were you? You were just a woman of the imperial family whose country was destroyed by the great Qin army. This kind of grudge has caused so many conflicts in the various dynasties of the Central Plains over the past 800 years, let alone some princess of a small country. It's meaningless. Huyan Dogwan looked up at the sky. Besides, that person is gone. Su Fingnian is just Su Fingnian. Who do you hate? Back then, you successfully instigated those 2 women to become enemies. To a large extent, it was you who caused the Great Qin to be destroyed. Are you still not satisfied? Little Thought tore off the veil. Half of her face was extraordinarily beautiful, but the other half of her face was constantly changing between the faces of unfamiliar women. Finally, it stopped. It was actually half a man's face. Huyan Dogwan turned his head and did not meet her gaze. He said softly, "You can go." She looked at the white veil floating in the distance and raised a hand to cover that half of her face. She murmured, "You really left? Then tell me, where can I go? You are always like this, not even willing to look at me. I never hated you. I just want you to look at me, just one look." Huyan Dogwan asked, "You really don't want to go?" Little Thought of Princess Grave raised her other hand. Her 10 fingers were like hooks as she slowly cut her 2 faces into a bloody mess. She did not show any pain and closed her eyes. She used a tone that modern people could not understand and softly hummed a song. When the song ended, Huyan Dogwan pushed her forehead with his palm. She fell into the canyon. Huyan Dogwan stood alone with his hands behind his back. He sighed softly, it's finally over in this life. That white dress was like a delicate white butterfly that was unwilling to break out of its cocoon. It hid in the cocoon timidly and looked at the outside world. There was no woman in the world who took off her veil when she was alone. Year after year, life after life, she looked at him in the mirror. In the corridor under the eaves of a private school in Beiliang, an old man was lying on a rattan chair, basking in the warm sunlight. Young children sat around him. Every time the old man sang a line, the children would sing a line with him. It was an ancient song that spread not long after the great Qin was destroyed. The song was melodious. A daughter of the Yang family has just grown up, and no one knows her. Born beautiful, she can't give up on herself. She chose the king's side. Looking back with a smile, the beauties of the 6 palaces pale in comparison. Chapter 1375. The furthest distance between 2 beacon towers was no more than 30 li, and the closest distance was less than 3 li. Hongxinjia was extremely strict and meticulous in choosing the location of each beacon tower. Standing on the watchtower of any beacon tower, one would definitely see more than 2 neighboring beacons. Bian Feng exchanged glances with each other. Among the many beacons that stretched into the distance, the deer-tail beacons located in a desert corridor was only an unremarkable one. According to the rules, there was 1 beacon commander, 2 vice-commanders, and 4 sons of beacons. After the northern Mang came knocking, the deer-tail beacons were supplemented with 5 sons of beacons and a post-horse. Deer-tail beacons was set up on the left side of the gourd. It belonged to the group of strongholds with the bell and drum stronghold as the core. Compared to the date horse stronghold, it was closer to the left and to the rear. As the Beimang vanguard drove straight down, although the bell and drum stronghold had not been attacked by a large number of Mang cavalry, the beacons of deer-tail beacons could already clearly feel that the battle was approaching. Those armored Beimang cavalry roamed nearby to scout the terrain. Yesterday, there were even more daring than 10 Beimang scouts who suddenly charged toward deer-tail beacons. The distance between the 2 sides was less than 80 paces. The dozen or so Beimang soldiers with excellent eyesight could even clearly see the faces of the northern barbarians. The beacon commander Sima Zhenming drew his bow and shot down the leading Beimang scout with a single arrow. The leader of the Beimang scouts was clearly shocked. After collecting the corpse, he resentfully left. Before he left, he even raised his saber and pointed at deer-tail beacons. At dawn this morning, Sima Zhenming, who was personally responsible for guarding the rear half of the night, stood on the high platform and looked up at the cage called Douling. As the head of deer-tail beacons, he was different from most of the illiterate beacons in the bell and drum stronghold. Sima Zhenming was a somewhat famous scholar near the bell and drum stronghold. His writing was very beautiful. At the same time, Sima Zhenming also had excellent archery skills. Therefore, he was promoted to beacon commander in less than half a year after joining the army. The Sima family was a prestigious family in Beiliang. Although Sima Zhenming was a concubine's son, he could have relied on his status as a general family to become a government official in a nearby county. It wouldn't have taken him more than a few years to become an official. The reason why he came to Calabash Pass was because of Sima Zhenming's impulsiveness. Everyone knew that His Royal Highness had 800 bodyguards called the White Horse Righteous Followers. They were all riding Liangbei horses from Xianli Ranch. They were armed with swords, crossbows, and white armor. If it was a few years ago, the White Horse Righteous Followers were of little value in the eyes of first-class families. Only third-rate general families in Beiliang would be willing to put their children in the White Horse Righteous Followers. However, after Su Fengnian's successful hereditary succession, the White Horse Righteous Followers became the White Horse Righteous Followers. Unfortunately, Sima Zhenming was not selected. Instead, a close friend of his from a prestigious family in the same county was selected. Last autumn, that guy went to Liangzhou full of ambition. It was said that a few noble ladies in the county who had their eyes on the top of their heads almost recommended themselves to that guy. While Sima Zhenming was happy for his best friend, he inevitably felt that he had lost face. In a fit of anger, he ran to Calabash Pass, which was almost the northernmost border line. At first, those deer-tailed old soldiers didn't like to talk to him, and the previous Feng Shui didn't like this weak scholar with a handsome face. He even threatened him to clean his butt at night. At that time, Sima Zhenming was furious and had a fierce fight with that old soldier. After that, he thought that he had beaten up his superior and would definitely be sent back with his tail between his legs. He didn't expect that the Feng Shui, who looked like a bear, to be so strong-willed. Although he didn't give Sima Zhenming a good face afterwards, he didn't do anything to deliberately make things difficult for this troublesome Feng Shui who didn't know the rules. He only made Sima Zhenming cook for 2 months. Sima Zhenming didn't pay attention to the fact that a gentleman should stay away from the kitchen and just accepted it. At the end of last year, when the Feng Shui of each fort went to the Bell and Drum village to practice martial arts, Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui had forced Sima Zhenming to do something beyond his ability. Unexpectedly, Sima Zhenming received a personal commendation from the Deputy General of Yuzhou Province. Until now, Sima Zhenming still remembered that on the way back to Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui with the Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui with the Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui. At the beginning of this spring, the scouts of Beiliang and Beimang almost exchanged lives with each other every day. At this moment, the Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui suddenly promoted to the head of Bi Rai's castle. Sima Zhenming heard from Old Sui that the Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui was comrades in many forts of Date Horse Village and Chicken Cry Village. They had been friends for over 20 years. When they were young, they were all brave men who had killed Beimang barbarians in Beimang. The two Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui came to the high platform on time. Hearing the footsteps, Sima Zhenming turned around and looked at the two different faces. One was immature and vigorous. After all, he was only 16 or 17 years old, the other was weathered and mediocre. The former was one of the Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui. In the words of the old Feng Shui of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui, he was a new recruit from Yuzhou Province. Even his fart was fragrant. The latter was an old senior of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui. His surname was Shui, and it was said that he was one of the earliest Feng Shui soldiers. After Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui was built, he became the first batch of Feng Shui. After many years of hard work, he finally became the deputy commander. However, the younger generation of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui liked to call him Xiao Shui. Even the previous commander said that he did not know where this nickname came from. Old man Shui had a good temper and did not mind. Whenever he smiled, he would smile. The other deputy commander of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui, Guoxi, was in the prime of his life. He was the only one who called the old man Master Shui. He was also a strange person who did not smile much. There were many round logs in Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui. Guoxi would practice a set of boxing moves on the logs every day for an hour. When he was on night watch, he would practice boxing moves on the edge of the high platform. Sima Zhenming had learned martial arts from a famous boxing master in Yuzhou since he was young. He had a rough understanding of Guoxi's skills. Perhaps his style was not good, but his foundation was solid. Therefore, after he became the commander of Deer Tail Ba Feng Shui, Sima Zhenming had always treated Guoxi with respect and treated him as an elder brother. Sima Zhenming smiled at the young man, Feng Zi, and said, "Spring sleep is hard to come by. Go sleep for a while. I'll keep watch for you." The young man shook his head and smiled brightly, "No need. Third brother Xiao and the others are snoring like thunder. Commander Feng, you should go rest. With me and little Shui on duty, nothing will go wrong." The old man smiled amiably. Sima Zhenming had clearly experienced the thunderous snoring of those men. He smiled and said, "Then I'll keep watch for a while. I'm not sleepy anyways." Sima Zhenming had a sentence that he did not say out loud. Perhaps he would have to sleep in the future. The young man, Feng Zi, stood at the edge of the high platform like a long spear, looking into the distance. The short deputy commander, old man Shui, walked to Sima Zhenming's side. He reached out and pinched Feng Zi's old and shriveled collar, not saying a word. Sima Zhenming lowered his voice and sighed, "Deputy Commander Shui, from the looks of it, our dear tail peace fire won't last long. Although Beimang's vanguard might not put this place in their eyes, even if they rush to set up camp below Sleeping Bao City, as long as they are still eyeing Wanhe and Xiaoguang cities behind Sleeping Bao City, Zhongming village will definitely be a thorn in their side. Now, let's see who will lead the troops to attack." The old man with turbid eyes nodded. He rubbed his hands and said softly, "Commander Sima Feng, I'll tell you the truth. Don't be angry. Our dear tail soldiers are actually very open-minded. You're different from us. You don't have to wait for death here. We can use our family's connections to transfer you back to Yuzhou, which is safer. Commander Feng, are you really not afraid of death, or have you gone crazy thinking about military merits?" Sima Zhenming didn't get angry. He smiled bitterly and said, "Of course I've thought about this before, but a letter from my family told me not to even think about it. Although my Sima family is a large family in Yuzhou, not to mention the previous generation, there are 4 Sima descendants in my generation who hold positions in the Yuzhou army. Including me, there are 3 who are at the mouth of the gourd. I joined the army the latest, so I can't be the Commander Feng. My eldest grandson's eldest brother is already a military inspector in Xiaoguang City who is only a step away from becoming a military officer. My family originally wanted to do everything we could to help him find a good excuse to retreat to Yuzhou, but who would have thought that my eldest brother was stubborn and refused to leave? The family could only settle for the next best thing, which was to move my 4th brother, who has a slightly lower position, back to Yuzhou. However, those generals in the Yuzhou border army aren't blind. My Sima family isn't an existence that can see the heavens. Once the 4th brother from the eldest branch leaves, then I, the 3rd brother, naturally have to stay. My father's letter was vague, but that's the general's meaning. I think this is also good. At least I have a younger brother who is 10 years old from the same mother. With him by my mother's side, I'll be able to support myself in 4 or 5 years. Once I shamelessly return to Yuzhou, my father, mother, and younger brother won't be able to raise their heads for the rest of their lives." Sima Zhenming's originally bitter smile began to become somewhat free and easy. After glancing at the young Master Feng, he looked at the old man and said, "I don't dare to ask the young Master Feng, nor do I have the heart to ask. However, I'm very curious about what Deputy Commander Shui and Guoshi Shui are thinking. Before I arrived at the mouth of the gourd, I heard that you old veterans are the best at fighting. Let's not talk about military merits for now. Let's talk about preserving our lives first." Chapter 1376. The old man reached out his hand to support himself on the cold orange stalk. His old face was wrinkled like a withered tree, and it was unknown how many sorrows and joys he had accumulated. The old deputy commander said calmly, "Marshal Sima Feng, to tell you the truth, this old man has never been on the battlefield in my entire life. I've never experienced a battle before. I've only seen it a few times from afar many years ago. Ever since I arrived at Huluku 17 years ago, I never thought that I would see the Beimang army while I was still alive. People died in battle. This old man has lived for so long. I'm someone who can't wake up at any time. It's not that I'm afraid, but I don't dare to think about the tragedies that happened after the war. Many years ago, before I arrived in Beiliang, I saw 2-legged sheep being sold by the side of the road. They were sold by the caddy, with butchers and pots of boiling water on the side. Dog meat was 500 coins per caddy, and this sheep meat was only 100 coins per caddy. Sima Zhenming's face was full of confusion. He didn't know what to say about selling sheep meat and eating sheep meat. The old man's fingers trembled slightly. He said softly, "Those two-legged sheep are people with only 2 legs. Women are called lambs to be eaten, and weak children are called small bones to be eaten. Some rare scholars, as long as they aren't too thin and sallow, can be sold for a higher price. They are called scented sheep to be eaten." Sima Zhenming almost vomited, but at the same time, his scalp went numb. This beacon marshal narrowed his eyes, staring fixedly at this old deputy marshal from Shirlu Commandery in Yuzhou, one hand on the cold blade's hilt. At this time, the deputy commander Guoxi, who had just finished practicing, came over. He glanced at Sima Zhenming and silently walked to the old man's side. Old man Shui said indifferently, "At this time, in front of the Beimang army, is it important whether you're a Beiliang native or a spring and autumn refugee from the Central Plains? Don't worry, this old man isn't a Beimang spy. I can't afford to lose the face of the Shui ancestors." Sima Zhenming sneered and asked, "Is it really not important?" The old man suddenly laughed happily and pointed at the silent deputy commander Guoxi. "Commander, your archery skills are on par with his, but in terms of fighting, you're far behind." Then, this old man, who used to be able to make fun of anyone in feng shui, no longer paid any attention to Sima Zhenming. His face revealed a deep expression of reminiscence as he said to himself, "Back then, I was in the Shishuleng Yamen Secretariat. I only did some shady business like copying scriptures and engraving official seals. My annual salary was not even 100 stones. I was only a minor 7th rank official. Of course, I didn't have a single hair on my head. Then, I had a way to earn money to support my family. In the palace, during festivals, there were many spring couplets to be put up. It was our turn to take the stage. Before writing the couplets, the eunuchs would bring in cinnabar and gold powder for mixing ink. At this time, I took out a large brush and dipped it into the gold powder. The brush broke. I stuffed it back into my sleeve and replaced it with another brush. It broke again. After I left the palace, I carefully shook off the gold powder. There's at least 2 tails. Find a bank and melt it down. That's a small gold ingot." The old man, who had completely forgotten himself, laughed. "Back then, when I bought books and collected them, I relied on these small gold ingots." Sima Zhenming was dumbfounded. He didn't know how to deal with this Shishu survivor who had been hiding in Beiliang for many years. Did he really have to draw his sword? Guoxi said calmly, "Marshal Sima Feng, after the war, if you, me, and Lord Shui can survive, you can report the truth. In the 2nd year of Yonghui, Guoxi, was the assassin who shot 6 consecutive arrows at the Grand General outside Liangzhou Pass. But if Shui and I both die and you are still alive, I hope you won't bring this up again. I, Guoxi, have lost all thoughts of revenge since the 6th year of Yonghui. Of course, it's up to you to believe it or not." Suddenly, the young man who was on guard shouted in a panic, "Koji! More than 120 cavalry." Without hesitation, Sima Zhenming said, "Prepare for battle." Although the vanguard army had flattened the Zaoma stronghold in one breath and killed more than 3,000 enemies, from the commander-in-chief Yang Yuanzhan to the several generals, all the officers did not relax in the slightest. 4,000 men had died in battle, so how many were wounded? Fortunately, it wasn't the hot summer season when diseases were most easily spread. Otherwise, with the ruthless style of the nomads in the north, they would have killed all the severely injured on the spot. However, within the vanguard, there was a group of people who were extremely relaxed and comfortable. These people mostly had elite cavalry and retainers protecting them, ranging from 20 to 30 to a few hundred. They were all young, between 15 to 25 years old. If it was said that Sima Zhenming regretted that he had missed out on the position of White Horse Commander, then these sons of powerful officials of the Southern Dynasty, or the people of the grasslands who knew their descendants well, were also quite angry that they had not been selected as the grand strategist. Of Northern Mang's three battle lines, the most important central line was the southern courtyard's great king Dongjue, who held great authority and personally presided over military affairs. Apart from the Dong family's private army, the rest of the troops were mainly elites from the various border towns. Moreover, they were right under Fatty Dong's nose, so it was very difficult for outsiders to interfere. On the west courtyard, there was Lu Gue and the north courtyard King Tuoba Bodhisattva. In addition, the 8,000 Chang cavalry had been completely wiped out before the battle. Only a fool would go there and suffer. Therefore, the east courtyard Yuzhou had a large number of descendants of great nobles who didn't want to take the risk and wanted to earn military merits. General Yang Yuanzhan, who had always had a good relationship with various forces, was not unreasonable. He acquiesced to the actions of the various families and allowed them to leave the army and take the initiative to search for the Zeoma stronghold. If they had the courage and strength to fight to the death with the stronghold, Yang Yuanzhan wouldn't stop them. During this period of time, groups of cavalry of varying numbers were constantly rushing in and out of the camp. There were even many small groups of cavalry that had been left outside the mouth of the calabash who had rushed over after hearing the news and joined the hunting game. It was like a bloody feast that was slowly unfolding. It was said that the second young master of the Xia family from Dragon Waste province returned with 80 cavalrymen at dusk yesterday with 16 bloody heads of the Yuzhou beacons hanging on both sides of the horses' backs. There were also 2 war horses that deliberately dragged the corpses of 2 beacon commanders into the camp. The 2 corpses were dragged all the way across the yellow sand, their flesh and blood badly mangled. One could even see the white bones on their backs. In the latter half of the night, another group of grassland Rong soldiers returned. It was a group of over 400 cavalrymen gathered from 3 tribes. They directly broke through a Wu castle in a valley at the edge of Crouching Bao City. These blood-soaked Rong soldiers waved their sabers as they entered the camp. The sabers that were clearly different from the Rong scimitars were all the famous Bailiang sabers of the Su family. A few young leaders of the Rong soldiers even threw down a few crumpled things as they rode into the camp. When someone picked them up, they realized that they were actually the Su flags. The Battle of the Zeoma stronghold had shaken the morale of the vanguard army, but their morale had been greatly shaken. At dawn this morning, another 7 or 8 groups of cavalry rushed out of the camp. With the arrival of a large number of siege weapons, the attack on Crouching Bao City was imminent. A tall man with a full beard whose age couldn't be determined was casually walking in the military camp. Beside him was a maidservant who was countless times more eye-catching than him. The young woman had an exquisitely embroidered brocade pouch hanging from her waist. Unfortunately, that bit of fragrance had long been covered up by the stinky smell of the military camp, leaving not even the slightest bit of it remaining. When these 2 people walked past, the Baimang soldiers sleeping on their horses all looked at them as if they wanted to eat them alive. In the early years of Northern Mang, there had never been a rule of bringing women into battle. Wasn't it all because those officials of the Southern dynasty had led them astray? As long as one's family background was sufficient, even the military supervisors who came from the royal court could only turn a blind eye to it. Of Northern Mang's 10 first-rank A surnames, there were 7 in Northern Mang and only 3 in Southern Mang. However, when it came to the number of B surnames, the influential families of the Southern dynasty held a slight advantage. On the eastern front of Yuzhou right now, there were plenty of descendants of the dragon-waisted clans. They weren't people that these soldiers who couldn't even afford to live in tents could afford to offend. The man who was accompanied by a woman walked and stopped along the way. From time to time, he would look up at the towering Crouching Bao City. Finally, when he passed by a large pile of tents, he was spotted by a sharp-eyed young master wearing a mink coat. The latter hurriedly ran up to the man and whispered with a flattering expression, "Big brother Zhong, what a coincidence." The man stroked his beard and glanced at the scene behind the young master. He smiled and said, "It looks like you've been hung by the horse's head all night." "What? You can't hold it in anymore and want to go and get some firecrackers?" The young man chuckled and said, "I've made an agreement with a few brothers. We're going to get some firecrackers to warm up our hands before the siege. We're going to work together to take down a big stronghold before the siege. When we go back, our elders at home will be proud of us, lest they say that we're useless." The man whose surname was a little strange compared to the southern court's big clans nodded and didn't comment. He looked past the head of the third generation of Wuxia province and saw 4 or 5 young men wearing brocade clothes and mink coats standing together. Obviously, they didn't recognize him. Their arrogant eyes were a little unfriendly. The man glanced at the horses behind them. They were all war horses that were ranked high on the grassland. Most importantly, good horses were easy to train. Bei Mang had the custom of hanging the horse's head. Once the horse was hung well, not only would the warhorse's pace be the same when charging, but even the height of the horse's head would be the same. There wouldn't be a scene of uneven horses. When they were running, they would look like a row of eagles soaring on the ground. In Bei Mang, not only must a man be skilled in riding and archery, but the skill of hanging the horse was also very important. It was probably like the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting of the scholars of the Central Plains. The man withdrew his gaze and smiled at the young man from the second generation of Wuxia province. "Be careful. There will be a lot of big battles in the next few years." Chapter 1377. The young master, who was a descendant of a wealthy family in Wuxia province, was flattered and nodded vigorously. Then, he said mysteriously, "There's a guy with the surname Pang. His father is the new general of Wazhu army town in Wuxia province. This kid is very valued in his family. I'm his best friend, so I told him that his father secretly sent him a master as a personal guard. TSK. A second-level grandmaster. So, I'm going to play with him today. Although there are only a little more than 100 cavalrymen, with that master, we can take down any beacon. I estimate that he can kill half of a smaller fort in Yuzhou by himself. However, that kid said that his father doesn't want him to be in the limelight, so I can't force him to do anything. Moreover, that master is arrogant. He looks at me askance. Damn it. Ha, big brother Zhong, you go ahead. I'll go out with them." The man smiled and said, "Go ahead." The young master turned around and ran 2 steps. Then, he turned back and asked cautiously, "Big brother Zhong, can I drink with you tonight? I've stolen some good wine this time." The man nodded and said, "Sure. As long as it's not my turn to attack the fort, it's not a problem." The young master smiled so widely that his mouth almost reached behind his ears. He trotted away. The 400 or so riders led by the 5 children of aristocratic families roared as they galloped away. When the children of aristocratic families smiled at the man on horseback, the man smiled faintly and waved his hand. After the 400 cavalrymen left the camp, they didn't immediately split up. They chose the fort group where the bell and drum fort was located. They were going in the same general direction. However, when they got closer, they split up and rushed forward, each looking for a target to attack. Along the way, they saw many beacons and forts that had been casually uprooted by the main force. The ground was in a mess. The corpses of the Yuzhou soldiers were all beheaded. After all, these heads were all heavy military exploits. After reaching their destination, the cavalrymen finally split up. The other 3 didn't find it strange that the 2 best friends didn't split up. Instead, they were full of sarcasm in their hearts. 2 descendants of a dignified second-class family only had 120 cavalrymen. 120 riders, that was really a pitiful sight. The cavalrymen began to go deeper and deeper. They didn't dare to get too close to the beacons attached to the forts. In fact, they had already asked someone about the details of this hunting expedition yesterday. After knowing the truth, they restrained themselves. It turned out that although those cavalry troops had obtained real military merits, they had suffered heavy casualties, especially the Rome soldiers who had taken down Fort Wu and obtained the Tsu flag. The reason why they looked like they had returned victorious was because they did not retrieve the corpses of their comrades and left them on the battlefield. Furthermore, according to various sources, although those sparrow-sized beacons were small, the archers were often very troublesome to deal with. Even if they managed to break in, they would still have to engage in close combat to the end, and would not rest until they were dead. What a joke! Northern Mang and Northern Liang had been fighting fierce battles for so many years. Who had ever heard of anyone accepting surrender? It was rumored that the former king of the South Courtyard, Wang Songpu, had made a suggestion in the court after his return to the throne, to see if he could recruit people to surrender. At that time, not to mention the generals who were holding the edict as if they had smelled shit, even the emperor's face had turned green on the spot. In the end, it was still the imperial decree of peace who helped Wang Songpu out of this predicament, saying that the matter of surrendering wasn't urgent, that they could talk about it after Beiliang was defeated. The imperial decree of peace even joked, saying, "As long as our army crosses Beiliang's path, even if Sir Huang doesn't want to surrender no matter what, my great Mang generals and the blade craftsmen in the rear will protest together. Stop killing, there aren't enough blades." The 120 cavalrymen finally found excellent prey. Young Master Pang, whose father was tile-building army's town general, raised his arm, producing a sheepskin map from his bosom. That South Dynasty third-generation ancestor who was trying to worm his way into being close to this man bent over to take a look, saying with shock, "Pang Rui, you really are something. You even have this kind of thing. It seems like on our Eastern Front, only 1,000-men commander has the qualifications to carry something good like this, right?" The corners of the youngster named Pang Rui's lips curled up. He put away the map, looking towards the small deer tail beacon on the map, nodding and saying, "Every 1,000-men commander has a copy, a total of 16 sheepskin parchments. This is something I borrowed from one of them last night. He only found it after searching for half a day, directly giving it to me with a wave of his hand. They don't need it, nor do they care about it, but for us, it is quite useful. Tsing Pingshan, let's make things clear first. We will take down as many beacon towers as we can, but in the end, we will have to split the heads of Yozhou's soldiers, so an equal split definitely won't work. I will take 70, you take 30. Tsing Pingshan, whose grandfather was the assistant minister of revenue of South Dynasty's west capital, shouted strangely, "Bullshit, is there anyone who doesn't uphold justice like you? You and I each have 60 riders, and I won't hide behind you. No matter what, we should split it 50-50. Pang Rui tilted his head and raised his chin slightly, secretly pointing at the old rider, who was resting with his eyes closed beside him. Tsing Pingshan's imposing manner immediately deflated, and he said softly, "Pang Rui, my brother Pang, sigh, we have been friends for many years. How about you take 60 and I take 40? Pang Rui narrowed his eyes and said slyly, 60-40, it's not impossible, but you have to tell me who that bearded man with a woman beside him is." Tsing Pingshan looked like he was in a dilemma. Pang Rui curled his lips. "If you don't hurry up, I will give the order to attack the beacon towers." Tsing Pingshan threw down his whip and snorted heavily. He leaned closer and whispered, "Zhong family." Pang Rui's expression instantly turned serious. He muttered to himself, "Zhong family, there is no other family in Beimang like them. Great General Zhong Shintong, Great Demon Zhong Liang." Among the younger generation of the Zhong family, Zhong Gui was originally quite famous, but after he married the Liu family of the Zhong family, there was suddenly no news of him. There was news that he was killed. But he has an even more powerful elder brother called Zhong Tan, right? Why, that sloppy man is one of the vanguard generals of the Eastern Front, Zhong Tan. Tsing Pingshan nodded, his face full of admiration and fascination. Zhong Tan was a famous person in Beimang who could compete with the second son of the martial god, Tuoba Chunsun. Not to mention Sing Pingshan, who had no achievements. Even his grandfather would have to obediently greet Zhong Tan with a smile. Pang Rui cracked his neck, raised his hand high, and waved it forward. More than 100 riders suddenly clamped their bellies and began to charge. At the Deer Tail Beacon, Sima Zhenming gave orders to his 11 subordinates in an orderly manner. He, Deputy Commander Guoxi, and 2 of the stronger sons of Bei Mang went to the observation tower. 5 of the remaining 7 were to guard the entrance and try to shoot 2 to 3 rounds of arrows to stop the enemy. After that, they didn't need to care about anything else and just tightly shut the door. Once someone broke through the door, they were to draw their swords and fight to the death. The other 2 were to wait for an opportunity to shoot down the Bei Mang cavalry. Sima Zhenming told them that what they needed to do was very simple. They just needed to wait for the enemy to come closer before killing them. They only needed to kill them at close range and not from a long distance. 1 less round of arrows was fine. After giving the order, Sima Zhenming, who was about to climb the tower, glanced at Old Man Shui. The latter didn't say anything and only nodded. Arriving at the tall platform, Sima Zhenming gestured downwards with his hand, having the 2 men with bows and quivers on their backs squat down first. After all, Sima Zhenming still didn't know if there were any Northern Mang master archers in that cavalry troop. Moreover, he and Deputy Commander Guoxi were proficient in martial arts. Even if they were unfortunate enough to encounter them, they would be able to dodge and not be caught off guard and killed on the spot. The 120 cavalry formed a neat charging line and began to madly charge. Sima Zhenming sized up the heads of the warhorses and calmly said, "These aren't ordinary cavalry." Guoxi's face was expressionless. He had already taken out an arrow from his quiver and nodded. 500 steps. Sima Zhenming glanced at Guoxi's iron bow and asked, 200 steps. Guoxi calmly said, "No need for consecutive arrows. 200 steps will pierce through armor. 150 steps, 3 consecutive arrows. Within 100 steps, 4 arrows can be loaded on the bow. If you don't want to continuously draw the bow, the furthest you can go is 250 steps. Heavy armor will be broken." Sima Zhenming coldly snorted, "Bei Mang isn't a fort. It's only equipped with light crossbows and not large crossbows. Otherwise, you would be able to experience the power of my large crossbow, 400 steps." Guoxi's expression was strange as he quickly glanced at this commander of Bei Mang. "It's not like I haven't experienced the range of an arqueballista in the past. I've seen even more powerful giant crossbows." Guoxi didn't say that the arqueballista wasn't strong. Sima Zhenming was panicking. 300 steps. Guoxi took a deep breath and suddenly raised his bow to gather power. This Shishu remnant had an almost imperceptible smile on his face. 200 steps. Pang! Almost at the same time, from the Deer Tail Ba Feng Sui's cavalry and the watchtower, a loud noise sounded. A tall soldier of the Bei Mang cavalry shot an arrow. Guoxi's arrow just happened to be the same target as that soldier. Guoxi's head suddenly tilted to the side. An arrow grazed his cheek, leaving behind a deep groove of blood. This deputy commander's ears were ringing. And that Bei Mang master archer had his head pierced by an arrow and fell off his horse. The distance between the 2 sides was reduced by another 50 steps from the rapid galloping of horse hooves. Guoxi shot 3 consecutive arrows. 2 of the 3 riders at the front had their chests pierced by an arrow. The warhorses continued to charge forward, but their corpses flew off the backs of the horses and fell heavily on the yellow sand. One of the riders quickly leaned back, his entire body leaning against the back of the warhorse. Only then was he able to dodge the arrow. Sima Zhenming also shot a quick arrow, but it was deflected by the soldier who hadn't drawn his bow from start to finish. However, although the arrow was deflected, the scimitar in the hands of the Bei Mang young master was knocked out of his hands. Guoxi opened his mouth and said, "Kill the easy ones first." Sima Zhenming, who had moved his feet to dodge the 3 arrows, lightly grunted. Chapter 1378. 150 steps. Almost all of the Beimang cavalry had fired a volley of arrows, and their accuracy wasn't bad either. Even though Sima Zhenming had changed his position, he still had to deflect several arrows. Apart from the arrow shot by that master archer, Wuxia didn't move at all. He used his bow to casually deflect the incoming arrows. Many of the arrows pierced into the orange cage behind Sima Zhenming, their tails trembling violently. There were even a few arrows that directly pierced through the cage with great momentum. After piercing through the cage, they continued to fly upwards. The two felt as if they were in a rain of arrows. 100 steps. Wuxia pulled out 4 arrows from his quiver. The 2 crouching bearers also suddenly stood up. After finding the crosshairs, they pulled back their bows even more. A muffled groan of pain came from below the beacons. Clearly, someone had been shot. Wuxia's contributions were still outstanding. His arrows pierced through the armor of 2 people and killed them. The other 2 were injured, but their combat strength was still great. However, this was enough to make them feel fear. On the watchtower, one of the bearers successfully shot a Beimang soldier in the neck. It was as if a flower of blood had bloomed. His face full of joy, he was just about to turn around and report the good news to his fellow soldiers when he was immediately dragged to the ground by the commander. As his body fell to the ground, this bearer saw that not far away, Xiao Yuan's brother had also fallen. Only his face had been pierced by 2 arrows. There was even an arrow in his shoulder. Sima Zhenming roared, "You don't want to live anymore. Did you forget what I said? Once you shoot an arrow, you'll be a coward for this daddy." That bearer gritted his teeth and used his arm to wipe away his tears, nodding heavily. Less than 50 steps. This meant that this would be the last volley of arrows from the deer-tail beacons. Sima Zhenming, who had bent over like a cat, shot down another soldier. As for Wuxia, who was being targeted by more than 20 soldiers, he was shot the moment he appeared. When he had no choice but to withdraw his bow, an arrow still managed to slice off a chunk of flesh from his shoulder. As for the archer, Feng Zi, who had just escaped death, he was shot by 6 or 7 arrows as soon as he got up. The force was so great that his body was knocked back several inches from the ground. When he fell to the ground, Master Feng lay in a pool of blood. One of his trembling hands reached out. But when he breathed his last, he was still unable to touch the brand new cold blade at his waist that he had just replaced last year. "It's time to get a new wife." That was the cheers of Deertail Beacon's men when they received their new sabers. Sima Zhenming's eyes were moist. After putting down his bow, he squatted down and helped that Feng Zi cover his eyes. He turned his head and asked, "Do you dare to have another match?" Wuxia, who had already pulled out his cold knife, nodded. 120 enemy cavalrymen, and they were elite cavalrymen at that. What followed next was the breaking of the door, the second battle within the beacon. Actually, Sima Zhenming knew better than anyone that the Deer-tail beacon was doomed to fail. It all depended on how many Beimang barbarians they could kill. Sima Zhenming ordered Wuxia in a low voice, "I'll go downstairs and guard the door. Deputy Commander Gua, you stay here and find a chance to shoot." As Sima Zhenming turned to leave, he said to Wuxia with his back to him, "Even if everyone dies, including me, Deer-tail beacon has already broken even. I thank you on behalf of the dead Bailiang brothers." Wuxia was silent, his 5 fingers tightly gripping the iron bow. As Sima Zhenming was about to walk down the stairs, Wuxia calmly said, "My real name is Guizhen, but now I'm Deer-tail Beacon, Deputy Commander Wuxia." Sima Zhenming didn't stop. He only raised his hand and clenched it into a fist. Wuxia used his hand to wipe his face, and then he produced an arrow from his quiver. With one standing up and one squatting down, he killed a northern Mang soldier who was about to dismount from his horse outside the fire beacon without deliberately aiming at all. The arrow pierced through the horse's back. It nailed him to the horse's back. When he reached the ground floor, Sima Jinming looked around. Of the 5 people downstairs, 2 had died, but the one on the stairs was already dead. On the other hand, the enemy cavalry had 11 dead and 6 injured. Without waiting for Sima Jinming to speak, the door was knocked open and they swarmed in. Sima Jinming walked out with large steps, bringing his blade down on the head of a tall and large northern Mang barbarian, drawing out a bone-deep scarlet wound on that person's face and chest. Blood splattered all over Sima Jinming's body. In the blink of an eye, he stabbed a second barbarian in the chest with both hands and roared, "Deputy Commander Shui, take all our brothers upstairs and help Wuxia guard the stairs." Sima Jinming charged forward with the collision saber style, knocking 3 barbarians in a straight line out the door in one go. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Old Man Shui ran towards the stairs with the 3 barbarians. However, one of the barbarians who had barged into the beacon threw out his saber with all his might, the entire blade stabbing into the barbarian's thigh. The barbarian tumbled down the stairs. He had a young face. He was the youth who had been on guard duty earlier and had seen the enemy cavalry attack. His face was pale as snow as he leaned against the stairs, his eyes filled with fear. However, at that moment, the youth, who usually spoke in a soft voice when speaking to his seniors, used the loudest voice he had ever used in his life to shout at the 2 barbarians at the top of the stairs, "Don't worry about me." The youth raised his crossbow and shot an arrow at the barbarians charging at him. A sturdy barbarian lowered his head in disbelief and saw the crossbow arrow sticking out of his chest with only the end of the arrow sticking out. The youth was hacked to death by a flurry of sabers. Meanwhile, Sima Jinming, who had charged out of the door, killed another 2 young Beimang barbarians. However, an old barbarian swept forward in a daze and grabbed him by the neck. Sima Jinming's entire back was smashed into the wall of the beacon. Sima Jinming, who was bleeding from his 7 orifices, slowly raised the Beiliang saber in his hand, which was still dripping with blood. The old man sneered and twisted his wrist, breaking the neck of the Yuzhou barbarian before throwing him to the left. The corpse was casually hung on a stone tablet by the Beimang's hidden second-rank grandmaster. Chapter 1379. According to Beiliang's example, a stone tablet in front of the beacon was engraved with the names of the 5 soldiers and their equipment. Sima Jinming, the newly appointed commander of the Deer Tail Beacon. His corpse's blood covered the stone tablet. As for the previous commander, the one who wanted him to clean his ass the first time they met, he was called Hu Lin. He was the one who had died before Tang Yanchao, the deputy captain of Fengqi Castle. Before Hu Lin resigned from the commander and was promoted to captain, he had once secretly sought out Sima Jinming. In the end, he stood in front of him for a long time, scratching his head. He probably couldn't bring himself to apologize. Indeed, having these old ruffians say such things was worse than being stabbed. In the end, the 2 of them laughed it off. In the end, they were both dead. On the watchtower, the old Beimang Grandmaster killed 2 more beacons who had drawn their swords. In the meantime, he used his hand to catch an arrow from the number 1 divine archer. The old man twirled the arrow in his hand. Looking at the 2 remaining ants, his smile was full of disdain. The short old man surnamed Shui said calmly, "You're the only heir of the Guo family. You can still leave. I'll help you block them." Guoshi threw away the large iron bow and slowly drew the cold, shiny blade at his waist. "Uncle Shui, the Guo family is gone." Old Shui, who hadn't taken action in this battle, was silent. The Shui family had more than 40 people. After Chu Lushan's 1,000 cavalry entered Shu, apart from him, who was known for his cynicism in Western Shu's imperial court, all of them had died. Those who died in battle, those who committed suicide, those who were killed. There were also the women and children who had been poisoned to death by the men of the family. How could he not hate the Su family in Beiliang? But so many years had passed. Old Shui didn't know when, but he realized that many of his memories were slowly blurring. There was Western Shu's path to heaven, a boundless sea of bamboo, and the world's #1 famous mountain. The old man liked being called Little Shui by those young Bailiang people. He liked the snow that Western Shu had never encountered before. He liked standing on high ground, closing his eyes and smelling it. His nose was filled with the smell of wind and sand. The old man asked softly, "Have you really thought it through?" Guoshi nodded. Suddenly, he grinned and said, "Uncle Shui, I didn't dare to tell you before, but this Bailiang knife is so damn handy." The old man glared at him and pretended to be angry as he scolded, "Stinky brat." 500 to 600 paces away from the bucktail horse feng shui, there was a sudden feeling that two riders were motionless. The bearded man squinted at the two figures fighting on the watchtower. "My intuition is accurate. Both sides would have experts. It was just that no one knew where they were hiding and when they would surface. In this kind of hunting game, it depends on who is the mouse, who is the cat, and who is the tiger." Zhong Tan's personal maid, Lu Daoxiang, was an expert from the princess tomb. She asked with a frown, "An expert from the tide listening pavilion on Mount Qingliang? But why would it appear in the little fire beacon?" Zhong Tan rubbed his chin. "Who knows?" Zhong Tan squeezed the horse's belly. "Let's go. Let's do a favor to those two young masters from the Yi family. They are probably half dead from anger this time. By the time we get there, the two Master Realm Masters we met on the narrow path will have died together." When they got close to the bucktail horse feng shui, Zhong Tan and the girl jumped off the horse and landed on the watchtower. The situation was a little different from what Zhong Tan had expected, but it wasn't a big deal. That Bailiang expert hiding in the fire beacon not only killed the Master Realm retainer that the big young master's family worshipped like a bodhisattva, but he was also heavily injured. However, together with another relatively young fire beacon, they killed 20 Baimang people. Baimang, Bailiang. The ground was filled with corpses. Zhong Tan could only lightly kick and send a Bailiang fire beacon's corpse flying. Ping Shan hugged his head and curled up in a corner, his body trembling. Pang Rui was crazily slashing at a corpse with his blade. A Grand Master and a Rank 3 expert. "I will be beaten to death by my family when I get back. I will chop you all to pieces." She, who was pretending to be Zhong Tan's maid, frowned. Zhong Tan coughed and waited until Ping Shan, who had finally returned to life, raised his head. Zhong Tan nodded at him and then said to Pang Rui indifferently, "All right, it's just an expert. I'll give you one later. I guarantee that he'll be much stronger than the one lying on the ground. As for how to explain it to your father, who is now a general in the town, I will help you." Pang Rui's face was stunned. Then, it was as if he had narrowly escaped death. Zhong Tan walked over and helped Ping Shan, whose legs were weak, up. He said with a pleasant expression, "Call young Master Pang tonight. I will treat you all to wine and help you all calm down." Ping Shan's face was covered in tears and snot. He clutched the general's sleeve tightly and nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. Zhong Tan shook off Ping Shan's hand without leaving a trace. He came to the battlement and saw the corpse hanging on the beacon flintstone tablet. This important person in the entire Baimang dynasty just stared at it for a long time. The woman asked, "What's wrong?" Zhong Tan's gaze didn't move at all. He said softly, "A few unknown experts popping up is nothing. But what is truly terrifying is where." Zhong Tan stretched out her finger and pointed at the stone tablet. The woman was puzzled. Zhong Tan smiled and stretched. "No matter what, let's take down Crouching Bao, Wanhe, and Xiaoguang cities first. Otherwise, our general will ask my uncle to bring me back personally." The group of people went downstairs. Under the dumbfounded gaze, Zhong Tan suddenly walked to the stone tablet and gently carried the corpse down. She let the corpse of the bucktail Ba Fingzi, whose name they didn't know, sit against the stone tablet. That Fingzi seemed to be looking towards the south. Zhong Tan left in large strides. After getting on the horse, he turned back and looked deeply towards the north. She said softly, "You won't die." Zhong Tan was expressionless. He muttered to himself, but the 40,000 people at the gourd mouth of Yuzhou all know that they will die. What they were afraid of was if one day Yuzhou, Liangzhou, Liuzhou, Lingzhou. Everyone in Beiliang would think so.